Conscious leaders put people first, but so do conscious companies. I spent 7 years of my life working at SkyRun Aspen, always joking that it was my public service subsidy. And they walk this. During COVID, SkyRun helped short-term rentals transition to long-term housing so locals had a place to stay and owners could keep their homes. And when the time was right, they helped us shift right back as a community. If you're looking for a vacation rental company that leads with care, then SkyRun is it. To experience their commitment to community and care in Colorado, use code HOP15, that's Healing Our Politics 15, for 15% off a stay. Whether for yourself or someone in your community, check the link in the show notes for more.
Hello, my name is Skippy Mesereau, coach, former elected official, and lifetime public servant. Welcome to Healing Our Politics, the show that shows you, the heart-centered public servant and political leader, how to heal our politics by starting with the human in the mirror. It is my job to sit down or stand up with the best experts in all areas of human development, thought leaders, coaches, therapists, authors, scientists, and more, to take the best of what they have learned and translate it specifically for the public service experience, providing you actionable, practical, tactical tools that you can test out today in your life and with your teams. I will also talk to leaders across the globe with a self-care practice, getting to know them at a deeply human and personal level so that you can learn from their challenges and journey. Warning, this is a post-partisan space. Yes, I have a bias. You have a bias. We all have a bias. Everybody gets a bias. And I will be stripping out all of the unconscious cues of bias from this space. No politics, partisanship, or policy here. Because well-being belongs to all of us. And we will all be better served if every human in leadership, regardless of party, ideology, race, or geography, are happier, healthier, and more connected. This show is about resourcing you, the human doing leadership, and trusting you to make up your own damn mind about what to do with it and what's best for your community. So, as always, with love, here we go. Welcome all to the Healing Our Politics podcast, the show that shows you, the heart-centered leader, how to heal our politics by starting with the human in the mirror. Today we have something exceptional. I sit down with expert in plant medicine and psychedelic healing, Melissa Stangl. Melissa started life on an engineering and biomedical track, the traditional route, but took an unexpected turn to become the co-founder of Soltara, a Shipibo-based ayahuasca healing center in Costa Rica and Peru, where they mix the most revered indigenous healers with the most renowned Western experts and doctors to deliver life-changing transformations. Melissa is also the creator of The Maloka, an online preparation and integration community, a forthcoming author, teaser alert, an Elected Leaders Collective board member, a friend, and someone who has truly changed my life, my service, and saved the lives of people I know and love. If psychedelic medicines are a new subject to you, that's okay. This is designed as a great place to start. We provide initial literacy and fluency about this growing field in mental health and well-being. We dive into recent research around things like treatment-resistant PTSD in veterans communities, depression, anxiety, addiction, and more. We decode some of the language around plant medicines, which can be confusing to the non-initiative. So Melissa says, for instance, that the plants called her to her work. What does that mean? How can we, in consensus reality, understand a statement like that in concrete, clear, verifiable terms? And we get into that in this episode. And many of you will never cross paths with these medicines, and that's okay. But there is still a lot to learn from the container in which they operate, including, but not limited to, integrating ancient and modern healing traditions, the difference between reductionist and holistic healing modalities, bridging cultures, and how to meet the challenges of cancel culture and cultural appropriation challenges when doing so. Best practices for creating space for necessary but uncomfortable conversations, something that we all need resourcing in these days. Techniques for represencing oneself when you are in the heat of a stressful situation, and so much more beautiful, transferable, non psychedelic knowledge. So, I hope you enjoy this novel and deeply important conversation with my friend, Melissa Stangl. Melissa Stangl, in addition to being a friend, someone I look up to, someone who has played a huge role in my healing journey, is the co-founder of Soltara. We'll talk about that and plant medicine or healing practices with psychedelic medicine, which is something that may be very new to people on this podcast. And we will get into that. Today is not intended to be, or I don't intend it to be, we'll see what it becomes, a how-to guide, a suggestion. I don't plan to get into policy. We know there's a lot going on in the political world. This is not that show. This is a show about resourcing leaders. And so I'm really interested in, first off, just demystifying it. What are these things at a very basic level? Should I be scared? Should I be excited? Are they safe? Who are they for? Allowing ourselves to, in addition to the empirical Western mindset of what are the studies, what are the data, to also allow ourselves to use anecdotal experience and evidence as something of value as well for people to listen to and to incorporate. For people who have no interest, no need, no intention to ever come within a 100-mile radius of a plant medicine journey, I believe that there are so many things that can be used and implemented, practices, learnings, ways of orienting and relating to other people that we can learn from the type of work that you do. What might the world look like with these type of healing techniques as a part of the kaleidoscope of care available to humans, and how we should think about that.
I really appreciate that. And I think that so much of the healing journey is about the frameworks that we use. And so, regardless of whether you partake in psychedelics or plant medicines, I think that there are absolutely some lessons to be gleaned from the frameworks that they really bring forward.
Certainly been the case for me and many people that I know. So, in addition to being a co-founder of Soltara Healing Center, a place that really has fundamentally changed my life and probably saved the life of one of my closest friends, who's the reason that I ended up finding the center in the first place, Melissa is a Elected Leaders Collective advisory board member. Her journey, like maybe many who listened, started, which surprised me, I didn't know this, with an internship at a naval air base of all places. So a service-oriented start to her journey. I almost ended up at Air Force Academy. So I think that there's probably a lot of commonality with people to that. Went into a traditional Western medical track, doing an undergrad in oncology at UPenn, doing research at Northwestern, ending up getting a graduate degree from UPenn in the study of oncology, going on to work in the biomedical field for a period in Hong Kong, translating that into the corporate world for a handful of years, which wasn't maybe the fit you were looking for. And then as I've read it, the plants recruited you. And we'll talk more about that, what that means going forward, which led her down a path into the deep jungles of Peru and Costa Rica, and finally to where she is. And I can also say from personal experience, she is just an incredible human who runs a beautifully tight but loving ship. And as a liner note, is also a really good dance partner if you're having a party.
We play in all worlds, don't we, Skippy? Thank you for that. I had actually totally forgotten.
We sure tried to.
I totally forgotten about the Naval Air Base internship. Wow, you dug deep into my LinkedIn there. Nice.
I want to start with very, very basics. What is plant medicine? what is a psychedelic in general for someone who does not have any orientation, who perhaps, like many of us, grew up in the shadow of the drug war and the ads around that. What is a psychedelic?
Yeah, so such a big question, and I also really relate to those who really grew up in the shadow of the war on drugs. I was one of those just say no people and really lumped all drugs into one single category for the majority of my young adult life. But I have come to realize through my explorations and journeys of healing that psychedelics are and psychedelic plant medicines are really a different category entirely. They are substances sometimes referred to as medicines depending on, which person or tradition that you're speaking about, that produce an altered state of consciousness. And these consciousness altering substances are having a very specific effect on often the serotonergic part of the brain, attaching to receptors that are working in conjunction with the serotonergic system and really help to change the connections in the brain that we are normally making. So, oftentimes, our sort of sense of self when we're just operating in normal, sober reality is governed by the default mode network. And that is the system in the brain that really dictates this like ego, this sense of self. And these parts of the brain often talk to each other, and they're meaning making parts of the brain. They help to orient us to the world and oftentimes become very much in the term default. We have a specific lens that we view the world, we have a specific perspective, and a lot of assumptions that we make for efficiency's sake, right? This is important for us in our normal everyday life. Psychedelics and psychedelic plant medicines disrupt the default mode network, and they allow an opportunity to create new neural pathways, new connections in the brain that can shake up our perspective and allow us to make connections that we might not have made in the past, that we might not have normally understood to be our framework of life. This can be daunting, of course, for some people. And it can also be really, really healing because, say, you got bit by a dog when you were 5 years old, and, from there on, you carried with you this subconscious fear of dogs. And that just becomes a very ingrained neuropathway. As an adult, maybe you don't want to have that fear of dogs anymore, right? And so you can work with psychedelics as an option, which allows you to actually rewire the connections between the amygdala, which is the emotion retaining center of the brain. That's where a lot of your unconscious emotions are held and acted upon for survival's sake, usually, right? But when we have these connections that are maybe have misfired because of some certain event or trauma, psychedelics can allow you actually conscious access to the amygdala, to the emotional retaining centers of the brain, to your subconscious. And through conscious access to your subconscious inner landscape, you're able to rewire those connections and perhaps come at it from an adult perspective and say, hey, I know that this happened to you when you were 5. Dogs in general are not here to harm you. It's okay that that was a survival mechanism, and, whatever process there is to really speak to that inner subconscious self and often inner child.
I love the dog metaphor, not metaphor, but the example, because it's outside the scope and it's so relatable. And I want to just step back and just check for myself as a very layman, knowing that a lot of people are coming in with no background. So first off, when we talk about drugs, you're talking about chemical compounds that are ingested in some way that have an effect on our physiology, our mental processes, et cetera, right? So that could be a Tylenol, could be caffeine, or it could be something illicit. All of these things are drugs in that sense. Potassium that comes through a banana, if I'm out on a race, is a drug in that way. So first, I just want to check: am I getting that piece right?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. And then, so when you talk about the serotonergic system, is that relating to serotonin, like the chemical in the brain?
Exactly. Yeah.
And there's a handful of chemicals. So there's serotonin, there's dopamine that people would have heard of, dopamine being sort of the driving chemical, oxytocin being the love chemical. And so serotonin is one of those. And that's the one that this class of drug tends to focus in and target. Am I getting that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
So what I'm hearing is that the brain is really wired to keep us safe as an organism, first and foremost. And part of the way that it keeps us safe is by storing old stories of threat, old stories of trauma, old stories of also love and beauty, etc. But it may over index on those stories. So in your example, you got bit by a dog once, the brain learned dog dangerous. That's a shortcut to keep you safe, but it comes at the potential downside of not being able to enjoy a companion or a dog, not being able to go into your best friend's house because they have one, or simply creating a fear state that shuts down your higher functioning, so that if you're out at a park, instead of being able to have a great conversation, you're triggered and nervous about the dog, and you don't have access to that level of higher cognition. So there's all these ways that it's showing up. And what I think I hear you saying is that psychedelics as a drug class are unique in being able to allow that protector part of the brain to release its hold and to allow the other sense-making parts of the brain to kind of come into the conversation to potentially shift your orientation to that pre-existing stimulus. The long summary. Is that roughly right?
Yeah, I think you explained it beautifully. So, what was initially an adaptive response, right? I got bit by a dog, so I need to be careful around dogs, becomes then a maladaptive response later in life when, it hinders you in some way, right? And so there's many ways to define what, especially when it comes to plant medicines, because I think there's a lot more of a spiritual element in sort of integrated into how people and cultures work with plant medicines. But in terms of the kind of more psychological and scientific approach, that is, I would say, a good summary of how psychedelics work.
So we have this class of drugs called psychedelics that historically, I mean, they had a big initial renaissance in the 50s, and there was a lot of really promising science at that time. And then they sort of got ensnared with everything else in the drug war, the counterculture, and understandable human reaction to what was an extremely volatile time. We think of our time now as very volatile, as perilous. But if you were to walk down the streets in most major cities in 1968, you would have experienced probably a worse situation than you do now. And so people had responses to that. And as a result, kind of all research basically shut down, right, for a handful of decades. And now we're in this stage of revival. And I know you come from a maybe more Western traditional background through school. Can you speak to why we should care about this? Like, what are, if I'm a veteran experiencing PTSD, or I'm a mother who's survived domestic violence, what are some of the modern science? Like, what are some of the studies or reasons that we should care about this work, whether it's for us, our communities, or not, but simply that it's out there being studied and looked at?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you hit the nail on the head saying that we are living in volatile times right now. And really, there are many different crises that humanity and our human and non-human allies and beings in this world are facing. And a lot of it seems to be coming a bit too ahead, right? We have climate change, we have an epidemic of mental health issues, we have addictions, we have the opioid epidemic, we have volatile economic situation and, geopolitical situation, and there's a lot going on. I'll focus in a little bit more on the mental health side, because I think that and of course it's related to the climate crisis as well, but I think that currently the Western medical model has a very specific approach to all illness and disease, right? They have their tools. Their tools are pharmaceuticals, which tinkers with biological levers in a very sort of reductionist, like trying to isolate what is the one, molecule that is responsible for depression, for example. And so we saw this with the SSRIs and NRI medications, where it was specifically to adjust the serotonin levels in the brain. So it's a very, very like reductionist approach.
For someone who doesn't know what an SSRI is, can you give us an example of one so people are like, oh yeah, I know what that is?
Sure. So like Zoloft or Lexapro, I think is one. So any antidepressant medication,
Okay,
right?
got it.
Your kind of standard antidepressant medication. And so that's kind of one approach. And what's really been seen is that there's actually a very low efficacy rate when it comes to mental health and successful mental health outcomes for depression and anxiety and PTSD. And the SSRI is kind of like a one size fits all, like let's try and increase serotonin in your brain. And there's actually not that much of a scientific backing that exclusively serotonin is responsible for your happiness or your depression. It's actually, we are very complex beings, right? And so there's so much more involved. So surgery is another aspect of the Western medical model. And again, that's just very like cut and dry, very specific. And then there's like specialists, and specialists tend to focus in and go very deep into one, like a gastroenterologist would not ask you about your childhood trauma if you're having issues with your gut health or, irritable bowel syndrome or Crohn's disease or some sort of autoimmune issue. And so I think when it comes to mental health, that falls short in well over half of cases. And so what we're seeing is a mental health crisis, and the Western medical model, which is very reductionist, very objectivist, and breaks it apart into its mechanistic components, trying to understand, how to change one thing to affect the whole, is just not a framework that's working.
I just want to join the conversation and share a perspective that is parallel, which is to say, we can objectively look at the mental health outcomes right now and come to the conclusion that I think is pretty foolproof, that the Western approaches that we have on hand are not sufficient. But I think we also have to recognize that, a human born 100 years ago in the United States around the turn of the century at 1900 was living to 48. And so part of the reason that we even get to be here talking about our mental health in midlife and later life as a problem is because of Western medicine's really miracles in helping prolong and improve life. And so I just want to, just to round out that thought of, it's not about replacing, but I think for me, and you tell me if you have a different perspective, it's about how do we now go back, now that we understand those constituent pieces, and reintegrate ancient traditions, indigenous traditions, more holistic and relational ways of healing into and on top of that baseline knowledge that at least I feel, every day when I wake up in a 4-room house with a heater in Colorado, and if I have a headache, I get a Tylenol. Like, I feel really good about that too.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important point, and coming from being heavily involved in the science and in the Western world and, making orthotics for children. This is definitely not meant to demonize Western medicine at all. We've made extreme advances and nobody can argue that, right? Western medicine has a very specific lane. And in that lane, it works amazingly. When you have an infection, you want to take an antibiotic. When you need stitches, you want to go to a hospital, right? Like if you break a bone or anything like that. So it's where there are illnesses and disease that fall outside of that very straightforward cause and effect,
Mm.
that I think the Western medical model struggles. And I agree with you. It's not that they're at odds with each other. It's actually that they're extremely complementary.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I find really interesting when you talk about kind of frameworks of healing is that what I see is the Western model is a very objective approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's science is all about objective measurement, and the sort of anecdotal evidence or the empirical evidence or really the subjective experience is often not held to the same weight of value as these sort of outside objective metrics. And in many cases, that's important, right? You do want to make sure that these things are repeatable. And there's, again, many ways that objective science is important and necessary. And at the same time, when it comes to almost like self versus self problems,
Mm.
where it's autoimmune diseases, where it's mental health, where you have issues that are where you're out of alignment somehow internally, and there's a potential physical manifestation of that, or there's a mental manifestation of that. That I think is where the framework of a holistic, really inner subjective. I mean, you are not getting anything out of psychedelics if you're not putting anything in, right? This isn't a case of the answer is outside of you.
Yes.
This is like your subjective experience is important. And I think that that empowers people's agency once again in their own healing process. And I think that that is extremely important to the current times. We need to remember that the answers can also be found inside of us.
I think that self versus self framing is so interesting and it's so clear. And yes, this isn't me versus a neurotoxin. This isn't me versus a virus. This is me relating to the stories in my own head and how they harm me or do me well. I think that's a really beautiful way. I've never heard it said. And yeah, I really like that. I want to come back to this idea of the Western versus how, I mean, first off, how would you characterize it? Do you think of it as, and versus also makes it sound like they're antagonistic, but they're not, but for lack of a better coupling, do you think of it as Western versus indigenous, modern versus ancient? Like, how do you think about the split of the type of perspectives?
I would say reductionist versus holistic. And there, I think that the terms that you did use are also very relevant because there is this sort of modern allopathic, right, versus often indigenous or ancient and holistic. But really, what I see is this larger framework of how to sort of understand the forest and the trees to
Mm-hmm.
truly become whole or to really get that full perspective. It's like, of course, you want to understand the trees, you want to understand the bark and the branches and how this tree relates to that tree and, what group of families, and you want to get really in there and kind of break it down and understand the component parts. But you also don't want to forget the entire
Mm.
forest because the entire forest is an entire ecosystem.
This is a great example. And I love these obscure examples that are so clear because if you think about plants in that way, like a forest, the ultimate example of a reductionist view of those is creating plants that are specifically tailored for human needs in monocultures. So you would think about, monocultured corn, soybeans, etc. And by focusing on that specific plant and on a very specific use case, in this case, yield and ability to withstand extreme weather, etc., we have created yields that wildly outstrip what happened in nature. And so we go on the positive side from the dwarf weed and the population bomb. And by 1970, half the world's going to die in starvation, to today, the largest population in the history of the world, about double of that time. And yet we have a food surplus. And so people are eating, they are living longer, and that's a huge win. But then you look at the unintended downstream consequences of that unitary focus, and you see soil erosion, death of other elements in the ecosystem, deforestation. You see carbon being emitted as a result of that. So we've done the one thing really well for that aim, and yet we've unintentionally also caused tremendous harm. And so now what we're seeing is not an abandoning of those things. Those things are still necessary in some place, but we're seeing a return to regenerative agriculture. We're seeing a return to old practices that nurture the soil and nurture the spirit of the animals and the people involved. So I want to come back to these different schools of thoughts. And I think a really interesting way to get into that is the dieta. Dieta is a practice that we'll talk more about. I'm just kind of teasing it now, that you use in preparation for a uni or ayahuasca, in this case, plant medicine ceremony. But I also muse about the dieta as the holistic version of the scientific method in some sense. And so I think that'll be a very interesting way to explore that. But I want to just put some like last tight constraints around this conversation for people who are brand new to this, and just kind of give them some quick takeaways to what's going on here. If we think about who this is for and why. Veterans with PTSD, one of the largest studies done. I'm paraphrasing here. I may be getting some of the numbers slightly incorrect, but they're taking veterans who have treatment-resistant PTSD, which I believe it was something like an average of 16 years of trying every traditional modality of treatment, including antidepressants, including talk therapy. And those may have worked for some people, but of this group that they selected for the experiment, after 16 years of trying all these things, they still had acute PTSD and were struggling day to day in their lived experience in very significant ways. And after, I believe it's 3 rounds of treatment, in this case with psilocybin in maybe a slightly more westernized environment. So with a physician, a sitter on site, and then integration work. So work around those sessions. After just 3 sessions, something like 2/3 of them were without symptoms. And the amazing part is that a year later, when normally what we would see is a reduction in outcomes over time, an erosion of effect. In fact, the opposite was true, where now it was up to something like 3/4 who were without symptoms a year later. I just find that to be incredibly remarkable. And I will qualify that with also saying, because I think it's important to be super clear, when SSRIs first came out, the results of the studies were way greater than they are now. And we don't know why that is, but it's likely that the placebo effect, the human mind's desire to want a solution, the belief in the solution, the reading the positive headlines in the newspaper played a role. And so I would imagine it's also likely that we will see some of these banner results erode somewhat over time, but they are so outpacing anything else and providing so much real promise for people who get to live that I think, as public servants who are both under stress and are making policy and seeking to create the conditions of wellness and healing for our communities, these are modalities of exploration that just can't be ignored.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really important and beautiful to have all solutions or potential solutions on the table, and really understand, what it is that's happening and why it is that they're working. And if we kind of go back to this understanding that scientifically psychedelics have the ability to rewire the brain, that there is also this holistic element, right? There's never been any medication FDA approved that is also coupled with therapy as like part of the protocol. And yet, as we are seeing policy happen in this realm, we're seeing that it's mandated that people are getting that therapeutic, emotional, psychological support as well. So not only is there an opportunity to actually address root cause versus sort of try and kind of tinker with the levers of serotonin in the brain, but like really take someone on a journey inward and be like, wow, I've never actually released the anger I have towards my mother, or, I've never really felt the fear when I was, 5 in this traumatic situation. Like really understanding and going deeply into the stories that we're telling ourselves, right? And how we're relating to that. And then having this psychological therapeutic process to continue to cement those new neural pathways to me, that makes perfect sense that this is something that could be a solution where potentially other medications or protocols have
Yeah.
failed. And I think it really does go back to that root cause and
Mm.
holistic approach that can be so effective.
Yes, and that's a great bridge to get, ironically, to get more reductionist to what you guys do, because I think the studies that you are referring to there are on the MAPS trial, so the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Sciences. So we've been mixing up a lot of different compounds in these discussions to just sort of set the table and help people understand the field that we're playing in. We've talked about psilocybin containing mushrooms. We've talked about MDMA. But at Soltara, you guys are working with a compound uni in the traditional language of ayahuasca in more common parlance. So let's now, for the rest of the conversation, just focus in on this medicine because it is what you know best and help orient us to uni or ayahuasca. What makes it unique or distinct from other psychedelics? Maybe what is similar, and just if you were to like make that as, kind of tight and clear as possible, mostly because I have so many other things I want to dive into.
Yeah, absolutely. So ayahuasca is actually a brewed tea of two different plants, sometimes more, and sometimes there's admixtures. But it is a combination in the Shipibo tradition, which is the tradition that we are guided by at Soltara Healing Center. The Shipibo come from the Ucayali region of the Peruvian Amazon, and they are a people who have been working with ayahuasca as the foundation of their healthcare system for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so theirs is a traditional healthcare system, but it's also more than that. It's really a cultural keystone to their work. So it is used for many different purposes, including community bonding, healing, connection to the spirit world, finding lost objects, etc. There's many different uses for it, but really at Soltara we work with it in the context of healing, and it is amazing for that. At Soltara, it is guided by the Shipibo way of working with the medicine and by the sort of standard brew that the Shipibo often use. And so that is the ayahuasca vine. So ayahuasca is the name of the brew, and then it's also the name of the vine, or uni, O-N-I, which means wisdom in native Shipibo language. So I'll probably refer to it as ayahuasca just to keep it common, but the ayahuasca vine, and then there is the chacruna leaf, which is the DMT containing part of this brew. And so the DMT, for those who don't know, is the psychoactive compound, that sort of psychedelic effect.
Dimethyltryptamine?
Dimethyltryptamine. And we actually have DMT in our bodies. I think it's theorized or it's confirmed, I'm not totally sure, but as what helps us dream. It's the chemical that helps us to step into this sort of visionary landscape.
I've heard that DMT is also part of the cascade of chemicals released in like near-death experiences, and it's hypothesized at birth and death as well. Is that true?
I mean, it likely has many effects, but it's also created in our lungs and in our guts. And so I highly recommend anyone who's interested to kind of look more into this. But it is considered one of the more potent psychedelic compounds when it's sort of taken in this regard. And the importance of the two plants combined is because normally DMT is broken down very, very rapidly in your system. So you have enzymes in your system that will break down the DMT within about 15 minutes normally if you take it externally. However, and there's many different really beautiful myths. The Shipibo theorized that it was the spirit of tobacco that guided them to combine these two plants together to create this brew. For some reason and somehow, many, many cultures figured this out in the Amazon, that the ayahuasca vine contains a compound. It's an MAO inhibitor, a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. And what that does is it inhibits the enzyme that would normally break down the DMT in your system. Therefore, the DMT doesn't get broken down nearly as quickly, and it actually allows it to enter into the bloodstream through the gut and enter through and pass through the blood-brain barrier. And so that is why you can take this medicine and the DMT, and also it's got harmines and it's got many alkaloids beyond just the DMT. Again, we're not just talking about like individual substances here.
There's an entourage effect involved.
Exactly. And it's actually some of the alkaloids, the harmines and harmalines, that they produce neurogenesis or they promote neurogenesis. So they actually promote the creation of brain cells. So again, there's this like many different effects. So when you combine the vine and the leaf into a brew and you take the brew, then it allows you to have an experience that can last anywhere from 1 hour to, 4 to 6 is kind of your standard, 4 to 6 hours, which is how long our ceremonies go. And I'll get to the ceremonies part too. But it's a very unique and individual medicine. So each person is going to respond differently, as well as each time they take it is going to be a different experience. And so this is a medicine that is considered extremely sacred. It's actually considered a master plant teacher. So the Shipibo have a very animistic worldview, and they understand and see everything as alive and animate and possessing a consciousness. And so particularly when it comes to plant spirits and, the medicines in the Amazon that they are ingesting these medicines or working with these medicines or learning from these medicines in the form of forming a relationship with the spirit of that medicine. And so they consider that ayahuasca is a spirit, a master plant teacher. It's very foundational. And so how they work with this medicine is through a ceremonial context.
I can see a version of myself 5, maybe 10, certainly 10 years ago, that would have heard working with the spirit of the plant and would have rolled my eyes back so far as to have severed my optic nerve. And I imagine there was a time in your life where you also felt that. And so I want to just pause to shine a little bit of a more maybe clearer objective light on that. And I think a way to get at that, maybe I'm incorrect. My story about this might not even be correct, but on the tapestry behind you within the heart is a sort of typical ayahuasca based pattern. And I don't know if that's visible on the camera, but you can see on my camera, if you can see that, it's a similar pattern. It looks like a little bit of a weaving. And I have heard it said from maestros that the songs that you'll talk about, the Icaros or other things, have been taught to them by the plants, that they come from the plants in this form. And I wonder if you could speak to kind of that pattern, and maybe that's a good narrative, clear pathway into what people mean by their interaction with the plants.
Yeah, sure. So I'll say that I am still very much a student in understanding the full, rich cosmology that is the Shipibo and other traditional cultures that really work with these medicines and have this sort of connection. And so I'll do my best, but please know that I'm still learning myself, and I don't necessarily want to be a spokesperson for another culture in that way. But the patterns that you see, the Kené is what these patterns are called. They're sort of yellow on the purple background up there. And they're also the yellow patterns, which you can't really
And
see.
since it's a podcast and I asked an inartful question, I'll just sort of describe it, which is, if you imagine looking at a quilt with a large form stitching, it's sort of a randomized pattern that moves around almost like a snake along the top of the quilt and intersects with one another, making like a kind of big, windy, intricate interlaced pattern. Does that roughly describe it?
Yeah. They sort of seem randomized at first, but they're actually very, very specific and ordered. So they're almost like fractal kind of patterns, I would say, but there are many different patterns. And so they're called Kené. And what that is the visual representation of the energetic field that pervades all things. And so what they really believe is that there is a oneness to creation, that all things are energy, right? That there is this energetic field. And, I think there's many corollaries. We have like the quantum field, or the idea of, oneness in many other cultures. And that this energetic field, it pervades our bodies as well, right? Like we are all part of this sort of field. And that is these patterns are particularly like the visual representation. The Icaros, which is the healing songs that they sing, are sort of the audio representation. So actually healers can look at that Kené pattern and sing. It's like sheet music, like visual sheet music. So each different pattern kind of corresponds to a different energetic blueprint. And so what is happening is during a ceremonial experience, the healers will sing the healing songs. They're called Icaros, which are them actually channeling the energetics of the plants that they have worked with. So kind of like a medical school, to become a surgeon, you are studying these different plants, and different plants have different energetic patterns. And we can talk about dietas and how that happens if you'd like. But so they amass these basically plant spirit doctors, which all have very specific energies associated with them and can be used for helping to open up someone's path, or helping to call in love, or helping to let go of fear, or sort of these like tools, right, that are helping people to heal in whatever way is needed. And through the channel or the vessel of the maestro, the healer, the person who's singing, the energetics of the plant spirit are channeled through them, through the version of song, into the energetic body of the patient to correct the energetic knots that they see in that person's Kené. And so that's essentially how they view this relation. They're working in the energetic world, and they're using these songs, which are actually for the Shipibo considered the main conduit of healing. So ayahuasca is a medicine that really helps them to connect to the other plants, to the plant spirit world. In the old days, only the maestro or maestra would take medicine, and the patient would simply receive the song. But now, of course, the patients also drink ayahuasca in order to connect more deeply themselves. But for them, it's really about the songs. It's really about channeling that energy into the patient's body and healing on that level.
So amazing. I mean, I remember even by the time I had come down to Soltara myself, was in a place of enough challenge or pain to do what seemed to me to be a very scary thing at that time. And hearing that the plants told us, and just scratching my head would be charitable, but then to understand that when this medicine is ingested, you can see in your visual field these particular patterns in the same way that, if you've done nothing but listen to this podcast and you stop if you're not driving and close your eyes and like rub them really hard for 10 seconds and then open your eyes, and all of a sudden you see some stars. And then if you were to take those stars and turn them, like you said, into sheet music, to give them their own alphabet, and then to read what you're seeing back out, I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
I get it. And to me, that like just blew me away. And it made it for me no longer something mystical or magical, but just very pragmatic. And I got it. And I think is so remarkable. And it's shifted how I have related to other things. And in simple terms that, let's say almost all of us will agree to, there's nothing we'll all agree to. But when we talk about the exchange of energy, it can sound like something that's woo-woo. Or are you listening to this because you're listening to sound waves? Those are made up of atoms. Are you watching this on YouTube? Can you see your screen? Great. Those are photons. Are those photons different color? They're different energy levels. What are they doing? They're coming from your screen to your eyes, to your receptor, being processed through the neurons in your brain, being interpreted as that color. So you are literally exchanging energy all of the time. It's how you eat. It's how you sleep. It's how you smell. It's how you die. And so there's no question about that. The question is just the stories we put around it. So I love that example. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to kind of riff on that sort of pragmatic approach too, I think it's really interesting that there is an understanding from the Shipibo that, like, plant spirits, for example, like that might seem kind of crazy to the Western mind, right? However, they have DNA. They are living beings, and maybe they don't have a consciousness in the same way that we think that we have a consciousness, but one, we don't actually know. They have been actually alive and around a lot longer than we have, and have figured out how to live in harmony with the rest of the world for a lot longer in a lot better way that we have. I mean, you can actually look, and there's research and science to back up trees talk to each other through the mycelial network. They exchange nutrients, they exchange information.
I just finished a book called Plant Sapiens, and not the most riveting read, but it is a telling from the lead scientist of a bunch of empirical research about these things. And amongst the examples that are given is the sharing of nutrients from one tree to another, or from one tree to many, when those other trees are lacking water or they're starting to die. And this is the one that really got me. In tightly packed environments where there are multiple different genus of trees, the trees will share nutrients across genus, but in a, let's call it, nutrient or water scarce environment, they will direct a disproportionate amount of the nutrient to like trees, to kin. And so there is some method by which they are aware of what's going on outside and exercise some form of choice, whether you want to use that word or not, into how to direct those things. So I'm with you.
Yeah, it makes so much sense, once we sort of get over this idea that like humans are the only like conscious beings, or that there's some superior level of consciousness. Because, I've even heard that trees, if there's like a deer eating, leaves off of a tree in one area of the forest, that tree will communicate signals to like its relatives farther in the forest. And those trees farther down will start to secrete chemicals that will make their leaves taste worse to
Tomato
the deer.
plants do this.
It's of course it's an intelligent living system, right? Like they've been around, they're part of this ecosystem, they have DNA, there's like, it just, to me, like kind of coming into this work, like how do I actually understand or connect with that consciousness? Because there's clearly so much wisdom there that we can learn as other living beings in this same ecosystem that we're sharing. And this method is, according to the Shipibo, and I believe this as well, a way to really commune. I mean, you're actually ingesting the DNA of that plant. And for some reason, those plants have very, very specific compounds that perfectly fit into the receptors in our brain to really open up and change our entire experience and really expand our own consciousness. And so for me to think that that's not some sort of synergistic relationship between two different conscious living beings, I mean, that seems silly. Like, how could it not be, right? So there's like a deeper understanding of how we are interrelated and interconnected, and how we can commune with other living beings in nature in these traditions that really honor and revere this work. And I think, again, because the way that these medicines can work is so connected to how we are participating in that experience, that is where this sort of ceremony and ritual and intention and holistic context, including preparation beforehand, and how it's done in community, especially with ayahuasca, and how the food that you're eating beforehand and during, and all of these things are connected and creating this very like holistic approach. And again, even within this tradition, it's not just about the ayahuasca, it's the ceremony, it's the Icaros actually that is the main star of the show here. And so that is where I think we can really take a different framework and perspective, because even I see, all of the excitement around ayahuasca, and I'm guilty of it too, right? Like I've deeply connected to this medicine. And of course, when we're talking about Soltara, we are highlighting the fact that ayahuasca is the plant medicine we use. But, stepping into the space, it's about so much more than the ayahuasca itself. And I think that really understanding the full context of the medicine wheel, which does involve energetics and the food that we put into our bodies and the people that we're sharing the space with, and how we're processing things, is so important. I'm really grateful to the cultures that have understood this very, very deeply and allowed us to take the lane that Western medicine has pursued and really like bring it back to the main highway, because for thousands and thousands of years, humanity has taken a more holistic and traditional approach to healing. And there's a real opportunity here to see how synergistic they can be. Like, hey guys, we learned a lot over here. How can we like bring these things together? And it's great to understand the science, and it's great to really understand how these pieces fit together, and also connect to the mystery and connect to the ecosystem. Understand that each individual component is not the answer, right?
Yeah.
It's this synergistic, more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah. And I love the thought of keeping an open mind. How can it hurt? And if the best predictor of future outcomes is past results, then we only need to look at the annals of human history to recognize that we regularly misjudge ourselves at the center of importance of everything to our own peril and inaccuracy. You're talking about beings to whom we extend the belief of consciousness and agency. And that didn't include human women at one point. And then it included humans, but not human children. And then it included human children. And then and then Jane Goodall comes around and okay, maybe there's some higher primates. And then. If you look at our place in the universe, the Earth is the only celestial body. It is all that will ever be or ever is. Oh, what's that moon thing? Oh, we've got some planets. Oh, the sun's in the middle. That's a problem. Well, but what I mean, we're definitely the only. Oh no, there's a galaxy. There's like thousands of these. Okay, and we're on the outside edge of the spiral arm, and we're not in the middle of the. Okay.
And then James Webb comes along, and
Boom.
we're just like, oh wow.
So, however great the level of disbelief that you may have is, and however warranted it may end up being proven, what would it look like to just suspend disbelief for a moment and just question and greet it with curiosity?
I mean, that was my journey. I was a hardcore atheist, almost as I think a trauma response to a religious upbringing that was very different. It felt for me as if I was being told a way to believe, and that I personally had no say in the way of the world or in my own belief system. And for me, I wasn't served by it. I was told that I was sinful and wrong. And, for me, that was not healthy. And so I became an atheist for a long time. And I was like, yeah, like there's nothing else out. Like if it can't be measured, it doesn't exist. Right. And that's not like a totally crazy framework and worldview to have, because again, it was like trying to reactivate my own agency and my belief system. I was like, well, if I can't see it or experience it, then like, how do I know it's real? And then I stepped into this world. And I mean, for anyone who has met ayahuasca, it's sort of hard to deny that there's something going on beyond what I can understand. And for me, at a certain point, to say that I knew for sure that there was nothing else out there was just as sort of like stubborn and dogmatic as to say, for sure this is the way of the world, and, and any sort of fundamental religion, right? So to remain sort of agnostic because of my own experiences, and because I have, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, right?
Yeah, you've replaced the dogmatism of rote religion with the dogmatism of scientism at the exclusion of the reality that the whole point of the scientific method is to be wrong over and over and over again, which is a mistake that I also made in my college years when I knew so much because I knew so little.
Right.
Oh my God. Okay. I love that. All right. So that's a great bridge into your personal journey. But I want to do like a 60-second play-by-play of if someone was coming to Soltara, what they would experience from the time of having the inspiration to being, let's call it a month through integration, just so people get a sense of like what that looks like, what the steps are, and then we'll hop into your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So when someone is interested in working with ayahuasca, guided by the Shipibo tradition for Soltara, we absolutely want to connect with them. We want to answer any questions that they may have. They can call us, they can email us. We're happy to speak. They can book a discovery call. When they're ready to take the plunge, they'll first go through an intake process. And this is very important because while ayahuasca has a lot of healing potential, for some, it's also contraindicated. So it can be dangerous if there are certain combinations with certain medications, such as SSRIs, certain medical diagnoses or mental health conditions. For example, it's not recommended for people with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. It can further destabilize them. So we'll go through an intake process that involves consulting with a therapist and a medical advisor, and also really just talking to somebody and really ensuring that a retreat with us is going to be a good fit for them, that they're in a place where they're ready and able to. So once they go through our intake process, they're confirmed for a retreat, then we'll invite them into the preparation phase. And that involves a holistic preparation. So you'll receive resources that addresses the physical preparation, which includes dieta, as you mentioned before. So really cutting out certain foods such as highly processed foods, red meat, definitely pork, alcohol, other substances, things like that. So we kind of share a list. And the purpose of that is not deprivation. The purpose of that is to really help your body to be able to receive the medicine and really for you to get the most out of that experience. And oftentimes we can numb with certain foods, lots of sugar, lots of salt, etc. It's not meant to demonize that, but as we kind of cut it out, we really start to recognize that perhaps there are emotional patterns that can surface that were maybe being covered up before. And that's wonderful. That's really important. And that's completely normal. It's part of the process. This is kind of the beginning of the healing process, right? So physical preparation, emotional, mental, spiritual, relational, interpersonal, cultural. So we share resources about the tradition. We have group preparation circles. We actually have an online community called the Maloka, which is a space for people to connect with others on the journey, receive resources, connect with our network of practitioners that all have plant medicine experience to help them prepare, whether that be through therapy, like therapists, or spiritual practitioners, or somatic experiencing, very many different modalities. So we'll have extensive preparation support available, and then they'll have the retreat. Working with ayahuasca is a process, and typically there's a minimum of 3 ceremonies that we offer and a maximum of 7. But our standard program is 1 week, 8 days with 4 ceremonies. Our shortest is 5 nights, 6 days with 3, and then our longest is 12 nights with 7. Say you're coming for a week, and when you arrive, we pick you up from a hotel near the airport. Everyone kind of comes on a group shuttle to Soltara. There's a welcome orientation. The week layout is arrival night is basically orientation and dinner, and then there's 2 ceremony nights in a row the next day, and then a day off, and then 2 more ceremonies, and then a day of integration, and then departure. And so ceremonies take place at night. They start around 7:30 p.m. There's yoga before every ceremony, so some really grounding yin yoga to kind of get you into your body. Before the first ceremony, we'll have a Vomitivo practice, which is it sounds scary, but it's not. It's just
Surprisingly delightful.
yeah. It's a very strong lemongrass tea, so it's not like anything crazy. And you basically drink enough to physically induce the purge. And really, what that's doing is beginning the cleansing process. It's also kind of a communal experience to really demystify and de escalate any fear around purging, around potentially vomiting, which is one way that the medicine can work in the system to clear energy and emotions. So we'll have a Vomitivo.
Can I share a little
Yeah,
anecdote?
please. Love the Vomitivo anecdotes.
So, Vomitivo was a very surprisingly clarifying and transcendent experience for me, in that you think, oh God, I'm going to go practice vomiting. This is crazy and terrible and weird. And what I found that was so strange is I had taken my diet very seriously. And when I was capable of bringing that tea back up and expelling it through my mouth, I felt no pain. And that was like very surprising to me. And what I realized at that moment was every time I had previously vomited in my life, I had less often, if I'm being honest, been sick and taking medicines, etc. More often, I had drank too much alcohol and I had been eating poor food. And I realized through that physical experience how much I had been hurting myself without even thinking about it or thinking of it as normal, and recognizing that the same physical behavior without the what I viewed at that time as negative choices around alcohol, food, diet, etc., caused me no pain. And it was such a clarifying moment for me of how my choices, often choices that I didn't even think about as choices, were negatively impacting my quality of life.
Wow.
And it still like just totally sticks with me.
Oh, wow. I love that so much. And I think that one, that's a beautiful process. And two, I think it's a perfect example of, how we can sometimes associate some of the effects that these medicines, which again are operating from a different framework, have on us as like, oh my gosh, it's scary, it's negative. Like I might be vomiting, I might be nauseous, I might be like shaking. And, but actually how when you sort of when you go into that intentionally and when you have prepared for that type of experience, then what you're really releasing actually feels amazing.
Yeah.
Because it feels like you're actually releasing emotions, right? It's not just like the liquid you drank, and it's your nervous system actually getting rid of the traumatic energy that may have been trapped there for a long time. So I love that. And and it ends up being, we make it kind of fun. We do it in groups and we cheer each other on, and it becomes this really bonding experience. And then we give everyone a little bit of a break and then a nourishing breakfast. And then we go into an ayahuasca or uni talk where we bring the maestros in and we have them introduce themselves to everybody and meet everybody and share about the medicine and really help people to have tools and really sort of demystify the process to get them prepared for that evening. And then later that day, we'll have a flower bath, which is, again, really just helping people connect to the plant. So the maestros will make flower baths and they'll sort of pour it over people's head and they'll air dry. So that's another way to kind of prepare for ceremony. I won't go through every single day of the schedule, but just to name some other parts of the programming, we have individual consultations with the healers as well, so they can sort of help to adjust treatment or make sure that their songs are matching the intentions of the person. And then we'll have group shares, which is a super important part of the experience. It's an opportunity for people to be witnessed in their healing by compassionate others and also compassionately witness others. And we actually call them Sharimonies because it is in itself its own medicine and ceremony. And then we'll have integration workshops. So that's, really helping people to process what came up and offering some tools. And we'll do individual processing with guests and yoga throughout the week as well. But we really try and kind of keep a level of spaciousness in the schedule. And it's really important that people have time to nap, have time to just go lay in a hammock or go to sleep or, go down to the beach. And so we really try and balance programming with spaciousness throughout the week. And we also have a very extensive integration program. This was actually one of the pillars of founding Soltara in 2018, was really trying to focus on, and that includes preparation too, like really helping to be that bridge between a ceremonial, potentially transformative experience and life back home. So again, in similar ways to how we offer extensive preparation, in those same categories, we'll offer integration, and that will be during the retreat as well as after.
Amazing. Beautiful, clear, and precise. And now a quick break from our sponsors, and we'll be right back to the show.
Leadership is about making tough calls under pressure. The key is knowing who to trust. When Aspen faced short-term rental and zoning challenges, I turned to SkyRun Vacation Rentals in Aspen. They gave it to me straight and trusted me to do what was best for our community. With their help, we crafted balanced regulations that strengthened our economy, supported locals, and preserved our character. If you need expert guidance in a time of STR or zoning challenge, give them a call. And to experience their commitment to community and care in Colorado, don't take it from me, use code HOP15, that's Healing Our Politics 15, for 15% off a stay, whether for yourself or someone in your community, there's a link in the show notes. Feel free to pass it along. The Healing Our Politics podcast is brought to you by the Elected Leaders Collective, the first leading and most highly recognized name in mental health, well-being, and performance coaching for elected leaders and public servants, designed specifically for you. Now, don't be fooled by the name. The Elected Leaders Collective is not just for elected leaders. It is for all public servants, staffers, volunteers, government, nonprofit, whole organizations. This is for you. If you are filled with passion for improving your community and world, but are tired, as I am, of the anger, stress, and vitriol, if you find yourself banging your head against that same wall, struggling with the incoming criticism and threats, arguing with colleagues who are supposed to be on your team, and questioning if it's even worth it anymore, then the Elected Leaders Collective programming is specifically for you. With the Elected Leaders Collective, you will learn to become a hashtag political healer, building the authentic, unshakable confidence and courage to stay true to yourself through the anger and pressure, while cultivating the open, empathetic mind to meet others with the curiosity, compassion, and kindness necessary to respond to threats, improve challenging relationships, de-escalate conflict, and bring people in your community together to solve real problems and get shit done. You'll reduce stress, anxiety, and overwhelm and become a more effective leader while having time for your family, yourself, your health, and your wealth, sleeping well at night, and showing others they can too. Now that's leadership. Healing Our Politics listeners receive 10% off all Elected Leaders Collective services using the code hashtag political healer. Use it today and become one of the brave political leaders healing our politics. Use code hashtag political healer by going to www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today. That's www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today. So I think we've got a good sense now of sort of what is a psychedelic, how might psychedelic medicines be used, and what is their benefit, and also a window into the specific work that you're doing with Uni or Ayahuasca at Soltara Healing Center, or centers, I should say. And now I want to rewind a little bit and just understand how you became the human doing this work. And as background, we know, maybe you'll talk about it a little bit, kind of starting off with maybe what I'm reading into as a service orientation with the Navy into oncology, but also kind of moving from this world of like engineer into medicine. And so there's this transition that happens. And I thought a good place to start is, as a frame, with the book you wrote, which is called Roots of Consciousness: A Modern Skeptic's Journey into Plant Medicine and Psychedelic Science. And I wonder, are you the skeptic?
So I'll clarify first by saying that the book is not published yet. It's actually been a very interesting journey with it, because it's sort of shifted and molded. It's kind of got its own soul, and kind of hearkening back to this idea of reductionist versus holistic and this self versus self. Like, these are the concepts that I'm exploring in that book, but it's not out yet.
Can people go pre-order it? Can people go pre-order it on their Amazon right now? Did we just do a tease? They can? Okay.
Yeah.
Get onto Amazon, pre-order.
They absolutely can.
This has become an unintentional plug. Okay, I didn't realize that. Well, thank you for the clarification. And there is a website up. I've been there, so people can check it out. What is that website if someone wanted to look at it?
It's rootsofconsciousness.net. And it's been like, again, I think I had to go on this journey of really understanding more deeply what this world is and what are the different frameworks. And that whole thing was actually really started by this spark of like, wait a minute, how is it that when someone is healing the emotional root of a certain illness or disease, that physical manifestation clears. So people curing Crohn's disease because of their, again, this like idea of like lack of forgiveness of, a relationship in their life, or just like the fact that somebody could heal a physical illness, especially autoimmune diseases. And this has happened. I've seen this like happen multiple times throughout my journey. Lupus, scleroderma, MS, like reversed. MS does not reverse. Like it is a progressive disease. And when you go into remission, it just like stops where it was. But actually, I've like spoken to a woman who, after 4 ceremonies, healing some very deep trauma, her 13 brain lesions just disappeared, and her left paralyzed body was perfectly functional again, and she was half blind, and then she was fine. So this was sort of the spark of like, wait a minute, are we like looking at healing in a way that like maybe doesn't make sense, or that, there needs to be some sort of new healing understanding of what is healing and what is our own role in our healing process?
From a very layman's perspective, a very surface level, non-expert, autoimmune disease is simply the body attacking itself. It's where the defense systems go haywire and start attacking the host. And so what those are oriented at could be numerous things. Could be something physical, but it could also be something mental. And so if there is let's call it a cognitive knot that is creating dissonance and internal pain, then just from a purely theoretical standpoint, it would make sense to me that the body's immune system could accidentally or unintentionally go haywire and begin fighting the host. And so if you could remove the core condition that it's viewing as a threat through psychological processing in this case, but it doesn't have to be, psychedelic container, then to me, from a very basic standpoint, I could understand how that could result in reduction of symptoms. I'm not a doctor and I don't play one on TV, but it just theoretically in my head, it follows as possible.
Can I quote you in my book? That was beautifully said.
I think you should quote the doctors. Or at least the maestros.
Yeah. So, I mean, but you're absolutely hitting the nail on the head, right? And it's this real re-understanding of the mind-body connection, right? Yes. Among other things, and I think also the spiritual connection too. And Gabor explores
the Cartesian split is a myth.
Yeah, exactly. And really, to preface that, before I entered into this world and started to have these thoughts, I was working in cancer research. And that was very much about how to adjust or like specifically, target the gene that was responsible and try and find it and then, change it. So I was actually using nanotechnology also. And there's some really cool stuff that was happening. And I wanted to help cure cancer. That was my original thought.
Starting off small, Melissa, starting off small.
And I was just fascinated by how things could go wrong, right, in the body, and the why behind it, and then how to fix that. And so, like, I guess in a sense, that was always kind of interesting to me, and seeing how things could become realigned. And so, like I said, I was in a very Western framework, and I really am grateful for that time that I got to understand more about the science and the biology of cancer, and also of how things can go right or wrong within a system. And it also really helped me later on to be able to meet people where they are in terms of the scientific understanding of, what these medicines are doing. But I started to feel it wasn't making the kind of impact at the pace that I wanted at that time. It was like really working many, many years in a lab, usually like not very many windows and not very many people, and, maybe producing some results to maybe get in a paper, to maybe get in a journal, to maybe help someone someday. And for me, that was like just too slow of a pace. So I was looking to make more of an impact more quickly. And I graduated University of Pennsylvania. I got my master's degree in biomedical engineering. I originally started in biology, and then I was like, well, if I'm going to spend all this money, like I should probably get a degree that could give me a lot more options coming out of it. And the engineering department at the time was like, a woman who wants to transfer into engineering, like, yes, please come. So I was like, okay, cool. So I kind of did that as like okay, this will help me with my job prospects. And I like engineering. My father was an engineer and for an acoustic engineer for the Navy, which was how I had that internship in my younger years. Very, very just in the scholarly world. But after I graduated college, it was an Ivy League, so it was very expensive, and I had a ton of debt coming out, as I think most millennials can relate. And so I was sort of hamstrung a little bit. Like I couldn't just like take a startup and work for nothing. Like I had to get a high paying job pretty quickly. And so towards the end of my fifth year, my master's degree year at Penn, that a dear friend of mine introduced mushrooms to me. And it had taken me all the way until I was 22 to really like let myself be open to the idea that like these are not drugs and that this is something that's okay to do, without even realizing what we were doing at the time. We actually ended up having a mini ceremony. Like we set the space, we had this little ritual, we like made comfy cushions, we did like a whole thing. And it was a beautiful, beautiful connecting, different, expanding, full of love experience and full of like play and inner child joy. And so at that point I was like, oh, maybe that's like this, maybe these aren't so bad. Maybe these are something that's, worth experiencing in the human spectrum of experience.
Do you remember your ego orientation prior to ingestion at that time?
I was scared. I was
Yeah.
nervous. And I was also like open and a little bit skeptical and but curious, mostly curious. Yeah.
And what was the fear, if you can recall?
The fear of the unknown, the fear of losing control, the fear that, I was going to have a bad trip, you kind of hear that, or that, something was going to go wrong permanently. There was a lot of like stigma left for me from the war on drugs. I was one of those, people that wore the Dare shirt proudly throughout. I was okay. So here's the larger theme. I was on the path of doing what I thought I should do.
Yeah.
Go to university, get a degree, get a corporate job, like do the thing, get the success to whatever. Like it was just about every step of the way until right after I graduated, which is the start of my journey with plant medicine, really was because I thought I should. I thought that this was the way to life. And that's what my parents, that's what society, that's what all the adults in my life, patted me on the head and gave me, A's and gold stars. And so I was really just following this external path. And so I was like, okay, well, now it's time for me to get a fancy corporate job because I have a lot of debt. And this is what Penn has been preparing me for 5 years now. So let's do it. And I ended up getting a job at McMaster Carr, which was an industrial supply company and actually a great company. And they had this management development program, which, was to help train people to be managers of their different departments. I was like, okay, like this is going to be a job and I'm maybe not going to be like my passion in life, but I'm just going to take it and, see what I can learn about managing people because that's a very transferable skill. And at that point I had managed a small cafe and I was an RA in my dorm. So I kind of was in this position of like, okay, it seems like, leadership is yeah, exactly.
There's
and it was like, oh, I think, there was like some leadership that needed to happen. And I was like, well, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I probably won't mess it up too much. And maybe I could even do some good. So I'm just going to do it. So that's like literally how I got both of those jobs. I was like, well, no one else is doing it and they need someone. So I'll give it a shot kind of thing. So I graduated in May and I was going to start my corporate job in July. And I was looking for something to do as like a help me orient. I'd love to go on some sort of adventure, do something out of my comfort zone. I'd love to help myself orient to this next chapter, which I think is like going to be a bit hard and maybe not my favorite thing, but I have to do it. So I was on Reddit one day, and this was like the inflection point of my entire life. From the bowels of the internet, my life sprang forth. I came across this post from Daniel Cleland, who is like now actually my business partner. And this was back in 2013. And he was like, I take people into the jungle to do ayahuasca with Shipibo shamans. Ask me anything. And I was like, oh, I have a lot of questions.
Had you heard about ayahuasca at this point before, or was that a new word to you?
I'm trying to remember because I was somehow on the like sub forum of ayahuasca. I don't remember how I actively did that. I had had just that experience with mushrooms before that. So I was like interested in psychedelics. So I think I watched DMT, the spirit molecule, the documentary, and somehow I ended up being on this subreddit, but I wasn't like actively pursuing it at all. Like it really wasn't. So I just happened to be there, see this post, started asking questions. He answered them immediately. And I just got like a really good vibe from him. I just had this like, oh, like this seems like a good guy. And at that point, he was advertising for a June solstice journey of 2013 that year. And I was like, that's like perfect timing between graduating and starting this job. Like maybe I'll do it. Maybe this will be, the thing. And so at the time, my partner, who cared very deeply for my safety, was like, I'm sorry, you're going to go do drugs in the jungle with some guy you met on Reddit? Like, are you crazy? Like, I'll never see you again.
I've also got this van full of candy that I'd like to sell you.
Right.
Okay, so that's such a beautiful inflection point. And I want to just rewind for a second with my own observation for the listener, because I think we can get caught up, or I can certainly get caught up in the like, live your dream, do what you're made for, don't conform. And, that's like a beautiful narrative that goes on a bumper sticker. But when people think about it in the specific, the brain naturally and the ego naturally orient to risk. And if it's not just you, but say your child, there is a natural orientation to want to keep that person safe. And so what you're beginning to describe might sound really scary. And what I want to round out that perspective with is risk is not a isolated variable. It's in relation to what? So it's risk versus, right? So for example, if you were going into a study, I'm really going to mix metaphors here, but into an iboga study around addiction, we know iboga does have some challenges with heart issues. And so if you're a perfectly healthy person, they're not going to take you in that study because the risk of iboga versus a normal healthy life is very high. But if you are in, stage 3 liver failure, and if you don't stop drinking, you're going to die in the next year, that same risk profile for iboga is viewed very differently. And it's the very unrisky thing to do is to try that. And the reason I bring that up is because I think most of us, let's say it as parents or as caregivers of others, are still enculturated into the world of the 1950s and 60s and the Industrial Revolution, where it was genuinely true that taking the prescribed path of higher education gave you a much higher chance of getting a job and a good paying job and a long life and healthcare and happiness and family. And taking the corporate job gave you a much higher chance of stability and long-term safety, et cetera. That was true. That's no longer the world. And our mindset has not caught up to that reality, which is to say, if you happen to be lucky to be in the top 0.1% of income earners and you have a kid and you can send them to any school and any program and give them any special treatment, the reality is still that you have no idea what world you're educating them for, and you have no idea what outcome and job is going to convert for them. And so the idea of taking a quote unquote risk of following your dream, when you consider versus what today versus 2-3 decades ago, is very different. And so I just want to put that out there in people's heads before what is actually a very funny and fun anecdote that obviously went really well for you, like causes someone to tune out.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I am really, really grateful that I did pursue higher education and have those experiences. And I also realized the privilege I had to be able to do that, right? And to take on that debt, but also, be able to make that decision and, get that job. And so this is just my experience. And I think for me, it was personally very, very important that for the first time in my journey, I actually did something because my intuition nudged me to do it and not because I thought I should or should not. And I think that can be an important skill, or at least something that is an insight for others who may be feeling kind of stuck in a certain place in their journey. Because at that time, I kind of felt like the victim of my circumstances, even though I had actively chosen all of those circumstances. I still felt as if I was making decisions that were outside of me. And so I, was met with obviously extreme skepticism by my partner at the time. And I pushed back and I said, hey, I don't know. I just have a good feeling about this. I think I'm going to do it. If you're so nervous, come with me. Let's do it together. Then you can, make sure I'm, not
Come
being
to the
like
van with
sold
me.
off or,
We'll
whatever.
both gorge on candy.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, at least it's both of us, right? And so we went on that trip and it was amazing. It was definitely not without its adventures. But Dan was a sane person. He was an eco tour guide. And this was sort of his first time doing a trip with ayahuasca, with a plant medicine, rather than just like regular ecotourism. So his background was Latin American ecotourism. So for him, it was also actually, this trip was like an inflection point for him because it was the first time that he was like the tour guide for this type of experience outside of friends and family. And he's got an amazing story that's worth looking into, but he was saved by ayahuasca after falling off a cliff. So he literally hit rock bottom and ayahuasca saved him. And then for me, that trip was just like this opening. It wasn't like this mind-blowingly, hugely transformative experience, but it really like planted a seed. And it was not without its Latin American eccentricities. Like our bus got stuck in the mud on our way to the first ceremony. And we were like thinking that we were going to miss the first ceremony. And then a 12-year-old with a boat comes up to us in the river and he's like, I can take you guys where you need to go. And so we literally like go on a boat guided by this like boss 12-year-old who actually gets us to the center like an hour before ceremony. And we're like, oh, okay, we're doing this. Like, this is happening. And so for me, it was like, my first ceremony was like feeling a lot of gratitude for the people in my life and kind of going through each person that meant a lot to me and just really feeling love and gratitude for them. It wasn't super visionary. It was a little bit physical, but mostly it was just that. The next ceremony was a little bit more visual, but it was like a delve into my creativity, and it helped my partner with his depression. And so again, I was just like, it wasn't like mind blowing, but I was like, wow, this feels really important and good. I was like, Dan, I have to go take this corporate job, but like, let's keep in touch. I love what you're doing. I'd love to kind of stay in the loop. So a year went by and he built, actually from that trip, he decided to pursue it full time. And he built a center down just off the Ucayali River.
That trip in particular.
Yeah. So that was like a huge inflection. He actually met his partner who was there for a long time, who helped him start the center. And it was amazing. Wow. He built a center next to this little village on the river over the next year. And I sort of followed his YouTube channel along while he like panicked about the fact that the loggers to build the center were like late and just like all of the things, right? And it was just such an adventure to follow. And then a year after that, in 2015, I was very burnt out from the corporate job. It was a great company, but it was also it was like an hour commute. It was 10-hour days. It was kind of a little bit of a toxic work environment, and it wasn't healthy for me. And I was personally on the brink of depression or just something very kind of dark. I found myself feeling very dissociated, and I was actually praying for a change. I was planning on coming to Colorado or California. I was like, I need to go somewhere else. I need to move west. I was in Philadelphia at the time. And then I get this email, almost as like an answer to this prayer, like literally a month into me searching for other jobs. And it's Daniel. And he's saying, we're expanding our team down in the Amazon. We're looking for an operations manager. And I was like, well, I'm an operations manager. If I want to change, that would be a big one. I was like, all right, like I'm going to apply. Like, I don't know if I'm going to get it. I'm probably not going to get it. I've only, drank ayahuasca twice, but why not? I'll try. And it was the fastest cover letter I'd ever written in my life. I think I wrote it in like 10 minutes. And so I sent it to him, told him about my management experience and my love for the work that he's doing. And so then he gets back to me and he's like, do you understand first that this means relocating to the Amazon for at least a year? And two, do you think you can learn Spanish fast enough to talk with fast talking, slang using Peruvians? And I was like, yes, and give me 2 months. And so I was like, okay, well, I asked for a change. I got this option.
So then, do you have an offer at this point contingent upon language proficiency, or just sort of like an LOI situation of, hey, let us know how it goes, or how does that unfold?
Well, Dan is always, he's a very like straight shooter. So, I mean, the contract I think was like a 1-page Word document. But it was basically like, listen, if you think you can do it, like, let's try it for a year, come down in a couple months, try and teach yourself Spanish, see how it goes, basically. So the initial like contract was for a year at like almost no money. But at that point I was like so unhappy. Like, I'll live on site for free and I'll get fed. So I won't really have any expenses and I'll just have like this small amount and perfect. And so, yeah, I taught myself Spanish and I was like, listen, like, I asked for a change. The universe like gave me this opportunity. Now I have to take it. And so just as much as he took a leap of faith on me, having had almost no ayahuasca experience, I took the leap and I sold my stuff and,
Wow.
like just went down there. And yeah, it was hard at first. There was no electricity. We had generators that ran, a couple hours a day. There was a lot of bugs that really, really loved me. There was like, of course, no air conditioning, but it was also completely, I mean, those days still have this sort of golden aura in my head. I was the person that was like managing all the logistics, answering the emails, helping people, going to pick them up from the Iquitos, taking them on the riverboat to get to the center. I was also doing tours to Machu Picchu and the Sacred Valley, and we would work with San Pedro medicine up there in the Andes, and just like also getting to participate in ceremonies myself and making beautiful connections with people and learning from the maestros and getting to do dietas, which are like more kind of focused diets with different plant teachers, with the maestros there. And yeah, so I ended up managing operations there for almost 2 years.
You kind of almost in a moment shift from the problems of today, let's call it, which is like psychological pain, isolation, depression, the feeling of not being, in the driver's seat of your own ship. My words, not yours, but sort of how I'm hearing it, to all of a
Mhm.
sudden throwing those out and immediately replacing them with the problems of yesteryear, which is heat, sanitation, bugs, lack of electricity, etc. And I'm wondering, just experientially, phenomenologically, what was that like? Like, how would you reflect back on that period now in retrospect of the changing of those problems for one another?
I would call it an initiation.
Mm,
I really, really felt as though I had lacked that in a way that was meaningful to me in my own life before then. It was me sort of, again, just like following this external path and like meeting the metrics of somebody else. And then it was like to really just dive deeply into discomfort. And it was not only physical discomfort from the environment, but it was, I mean, the ceremonies were hard. Like, I really had a lot of things that I needed to work through and understand and process. And the medicine was, it was like tough love in a lot of ways for me. And there was a lot of love and a lot of joy and a lot of beauty as well. But I remember like about 3 months in, trying on like a little USB stick that could maybe connect to satellite internet if it wasn't too cloudy, trying to like have a conversation with my mother and just like bursting into tears covered in bug bites, like being like, it's like I miss everything and everyone, and like I just want a couch, and like it's so hot and I'm covered in bug bites and blah blah blah. And I just had this really hard ceremony and I was crying a lot, and it was hard.
mm,
And I remember also very clearly shortly after that having a dream where in the dream I was back in my old life and I was like dreading. I was just this sense of dread, the dread of the commute in the
mm,
winter cold and the dread of leaving and waking up in the dark and not getting home until it was dark, and the dread of like a 10-hour shift in the warehouse, and just like that complete dread. And then I woke up from that dream and I could hear the birds of the Amazon, and the sun was just coming into my wooden tambo just perfectly. And I was under a mosquito net, and it was like a rest day. And I was here. I was in this life, actually. And I burst into tears from gratitude. Like that for me was like the transition into like, oh yeah, no, this is like a visceral understanding of like what's really important in life. It's like,
you have a clarifying moment, of like which one of these things supersedes but doesn't replace the other, and have an appreciation probably greater for the things that you have lost and now got back. Like, for example, I imagine you would not go from the room you're in now back to a Tambo and a USB drive, even though you could, but you've gotten the benefit of the appreciation of what you have now.
yeah, exactly. And like I probably will. Actually, I'd love to go into a tambo in the woods for a couple weeks and like no internet or anything. Like I would love that.
Okay. All right. I love it.
But at the same time, like, yeah, in terms of long-term living, after a couple of years in the Amazon, I did start to feel like, okay, what is my sort of long-term plan here? And it would be nice to like have the option of, electricity if I wanted it, sort of thing. And yeah, it felt like a real initiation into a deeper understanding of my own values and what I wanted out of life.
That makes sense. And so from that place, obviously you go on and deepen that relationship and become a co-founder with Daniel of Soltara, and the rest is famous. And there's 100 podcasts people can go listen to about that story, which is, I highly recommend doing so.
I'll just share. So after a couple of years working there, Dan ended up selling part of the company to a new owner. And I started to also feel like there was a piece of alignment that I hadn't really been paying attention to until then, because I just didn't know. But the more that I talked to the maestros and learned from them, the more it was pretty clear to them that the mixing of other traditions and other plant medicines was not aligned for them. And that was something that was happening during and at that center at that time. And so I started to feel like, this is maybe a little bit, it was hard for me to be the face of that when I understood that for them, that was difficult and that was out of alignment. And so when Dan felt bad at that point that, things had taken a different turn, he loved Costa Rica. And he was like, I could see us starting over in Costa Rica, like, do you just want to leave and start over? And I was like, okay. I had taken some time away and I had consulted with advisors and maestros. And basically what we came to for Soltara, which are the two foundational pillars, is one, we want to only work with ayahuasca in the Shipibo tradition and no other medicines and no other traditions. And that's out of both respect for the maestros and their tradition, and also the understanding that for people that come through, it's really a beautiful opportunity to go and have one deep relationship, like digging 1 6-foot hole rather than 6 1-foot holes, and giving that people that time in their system to develop that relationship with the medicine. And then the second pillar being, oh man, we need to have like more than just like a Facebook group and like the hard work starts when you get home as our integration support.
Yeah.
Like we need to like work with psychologists who have plant medicine experience. And so that was really the second pillar of Soltara.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I think that's a neat transition, the 6-foot hole rather than 6 1-foot holes analogy. And I'm curious, in your own journey, what that's looked like. And in my experience, the process of self-development, whether that's through a journal or a medicine ceremony or a run, is a lot like the process of archaeology, where there's like a pure self, but that's sort of scattered about under the ground. And my job has been to sift through and figure out what is mine and what is society's or someone else's or expectation, what is mine or what was a projection from insecurity or fear, what is mine, etc. And so if you think about your own journey of development and digging your own hole, and I've heard you talk about growth and healing as nonlinear or spiral. So I just had the image of like literally a drill bit in the life of Melissa, kind of going down into your own archaeological site. Could you share a bit more about what does that mean to you, the nonlinear and spiral path of healing, and maybe pepper that with an example or two, whether it's from ceremony or not, in sort of story form to help illustrate for people what that might be like?
I really do see healing as coming back around to the same core issues or foundational aspects of self that were formed from a very young age. And rather than in this linear fashion being like, oh, okay, see that, healed that, address that, moving on to the next thing. Now I'm healed from that and I don't ever have to think about or deal with that again. I think that it's actually coming back around to these like foundational aspects of self with a deeper understanding each time and a deeper level of love and acceptance, and also a deeper awareness and empowered sense of agency to be able to choose differently. So I used to get very, very hung up on this idea of linear healing in the sense that I would kind of have these issues resurface again and sort of be like angry at myself for not having already healed. I've done X amount of ceremonies. How have I not moved past this yet? So, like, one example would be my inner critic is very, very, very harsh. Like, it's like I'm a nice person and I am not nice to myself sometimes. And I, I really have gone into what the root of this is. And a lot of it is this idea that society has imbued in us. Like, I don't blame any one person for instilling these values, but this idea that productivity equals value. Or like achievement, or doing something perfectly right, that equals love, that equals acceptance by the tribe. And what that led to in many instances in my life was, one, beating myself up before anybody else could, because if I was harshest on myself, then it was almost like this protective mechanism. Nobody else could hurt me as much as I could myself. And then also like really holding myself to a impossible perfectionist standard that, like, the more I unraveled it, the more I'm like, why, like, how could I ever expect myself to be perfect? Like, nobody's perfect. Like, why do I even have this like constant external measuring stick that is just completely impossible to reach in my head? But I would try and like have compassion for myself, but then I couldn't, because there were these deeply ingrained patterns that doing something right by someone's external metric meant that I could be loved, meant that I was worthy of love.
Who was your primary caregiver who either modeled that perfectionist tendency or provided love or affirmation in exchange for, at least in your innocent mind's interpretation, the being perfect or doing of the thing?
Yeah, it was my mother. And, I have a great relationship with my mother. I have so much love for her, and she didn't know any better. She has always had this commitment or desire to be right, to be correct, to follow the rules, to sort of judge other people when they're not following the rules, to like being right in a situation. And also like achievement. Like my brother was a bit of a troublemaker growing up. And then by the time my older brother stopped being a troublemaker, my younger sister started to be a troublemaker. So I was sort of this like golden child in the middle, that how I protected myself was just like trying to be the mediator and trying to be extra, extra good so that I wouldn't bring any more burden onto my parents. And of course, my mom praised me excessively, right, for being the best student and the best, most well behaved and things like that.
You got to stand out above the fray from your siblings, and for that you received the approbation and love of mom. And so you learned innocently, the programming became, oh, I need to do this, or I don't get that love, I don't get that affection, or I'm not worthy of it. Is that right?
Oh my gosh. And man, and I really internalized that like so much. And that was why I pursued this path that was like laid out before me as the right path,
Yeah.
like I was like, well, this is what I should do. So I'm going to do it because I'm a good student, because I'm a good person. This is how I adult. So yeah, so then it kind of obviously was like scary to change that up. And then even, in that process of sort of unlearning these things, then because I wasn't unlearning it fast enough, then I started to
Mm-hmm.
berate myself and get caught in the same
Compound.
loop of
Yes.
like I
Yeah.
wasn't healing perfectly, it's just like it's funny. So even still now, but I've made a lot of progress, and it's hard because I feel like the stakes are high and there's a lot that I'm accountable to, and there's a lot that I'm, in service of, and trying to be in a field that's learning how to walk in two worlds or merge and integrate two worlds. And it's like so important that we get this right. And so I've really, had to sort of humble myself again and just be like, hey, like we're doing the best we can with the information that we have. We're trying to, enlist all experiences and, stakeholders in this work. We're trying to have a strong foot in both worlds, and we're not going to do it perfectly all the time. And how we sort of grow and learn is really the metric to judge ourselves by, rather than if we get it perfect every time.
I'll take the opportunity to shower you with some praise for both of those things in my direct experience, because you are the operations manager. The culture of the organization mirrors you or comes from you, whether you intend it to or not. It's just the nature of management. And I have noticed two things to be true. The first one is in working with the Maloka staff, including family members, to put on a number of online events. I have literally never seen a team, and I've worked with a number of teams who people would know their names, they'd know their companies, very highly regarded teams, that was so diligent, proactive, detail oriented, but also just like compassionate in their pre-work, during, and follow-up. Like, it was so impressive to me. And so the perfectionistic side of you came through there in a way that I do want to celebrate. But I also want to celebrate the opposite, which is I had, a really destabilizing ceremony for me at Soltara as part of the journey. I'm so glad I had it now. And I had support there. Without that support, I may have been in a very different place. But that support, it was such a light touch. Like, it really trusted me to ask for what I needed. It didn't demand, it didn't suggest, it didn't prescribe, didn't tell me what to do or how to feel. And for its trust in me and its lack of regimented perfectionism, it was deeply more effective for me. And so I have seen directly the outcome of what I believe to be that integrative work that you've done as transmuted through your organization.
Thank you so much, Skippy. I really, really appreciate that. I'm so grateful that it seems to be working so far. And, and so much, I think, too, of this work is, especially with the facilitators, is actually to get out of the way, and that is another learning and piece of this work that, I'm constantly, because yeah, I'm someone who, I want every single detail to, blah, blah, blah. And that's also been like a beautiful challenge to really orient to a type of healing paradigm that actually mostly just trusts the person that's in the space, and of course, and empowers them to ask for help when they need it, right? But also,
Yeah.
like, it's not our job to like get in there and fix you, right? And so that part can get very messy, and that is okay, and that's important, actually, and just part of it all. So yeah, thank you for that. And it's been like the greatest and most fascinating impossible puzzle of my life to try and see how we can, do this in a good way.
Yeah. Paints a great picture of like you said, the spiral, the cyclical nature of healing and needing to come back and pass over old wounds multiple times. The image I got in my head was like a watercolor painting. You got a white canvas and you strike it with red. And at first it looks deep red. And then all of a sudden it's very light red. And it takes 5 or 6 or 7 passes until it is, blood red. but the paper's still white underneath. Like, you didn't get rid of the paper. You just have integrated the two. And, it's only once you have that deep red that you could pass blue over it and then create purple. And so there's also an additive nature
Well said.
to it. Yeah, that feels really clear to me. Is there anything else about your personal journey? And I know we could talk for a long time, but I want to give you the floor. Anything that you think is really critical to add for the listener?
I think maybe just the one thing that has become more and more clear to me in this field, but also as a way to model or pave the way for like a potentially different way of doing things is just this idea of collaboration over competition. And it's something that has, I mean, this is such heart-centered work. And there is this very deep, deep knowing of our own interconnectedness that comes for many people, and myself included, with doing this work. And so there's this relational sort of healing and this understanding that we're part of this larger ecosystem and that we're all connected. And one thing that has been super beautiful in Costa Rica is we've actually started to gather as a medicine community here, and all of the people that are involved, both international and Costa Rican, in this medicine work. And we have started to form an alliance to really see how we can benefit from our shared knowledge, understanding that the world is so in need of healing right now, and there's no shortage of work that needs to be done, and the more the merrier. And like, now is the time for all hands on deck. It's hard to sort of unlearn some of the survival based business strategies of having an organization in a world that is a capitalistic framework, right? Like, there is this very real side of like, we need to have a sustainable organization in order to continue doing the work that we're doing and also reinvest into that organization and grow. And can we trust that there is a larger plan at work here, that we are in service to something greater than ourselves, and that we are at this crisis point in humanity in many different ways that really requires and asks of us to start to think differently and more collectively. And so basically it's this desire to come together and really sync on like, can we create some standards of harm reduction and safety? Can we share resources for preparation and integration? Can we participate in science, research, education, service, and reciprocity within our local communities? So we're about a year and a half old with that, and it's just been the most magical experience to meet and work alongside others on this path, trying to do things in the right way and recognizing that there are many right ways to do this. Just because we only work with ayahuasca doesn't mean that that's the only right way, right? Like, really recognizing like, what are the minimum standards rather than any sort of one best practice that we can all align on.
If there was like a mental health professional listening who's interested in learning more about some of the conclusions you guys have come to, or a legislator interested in exploring best practices, is there a place to find this group that they could go to?
Our website is forthcoming, but it will be called La Alianza de Plantas Sagradas, the Sacred Plant Alliance. Yeah, we are actually just like really starting to get our ducks in a row to form an official association here in Costa Rica, have a board of directors, and we've actually already completed a study with the University of Costa Rica, a socioeconomic study on the benefits of and bioconservation actually of ayahuasca centers here in Costa Rica. And we're looking to do a public health study, which would be the first of its kind on a nationwide level in collaboration with ICEERS, hopefully this year. So we are going to be looking for some funding and support for that. And I think that will be really helpful as we, continue to destigmatize and gather data on this work.
Okay, beautiful. So I really want to shift now into learnings that can be applied in public service roles, that can be gleaned from what you've learned doing medicine ceremonies, but do not require any medicine itself. I'll give you a couple examples. There are literally 15 of them that I'd like to get to. We'll probably get to 1 to 3, depending on how robust our conversation is. But examples would be the dieta, which we've talked about, the opportunity to cleanse and clarify the body and shift the relationship to things that we ingest. Example would be the co-creation of healing or healing in community and how we trust those that we might otherwise think of as patients or different, but instead as partners. Example would be like creating healing spaces. What do we do to physically set the room and set our own mind and energy so that we can heal as a collective? Another example would be, I don't know what words you would use, but the integrating of indigenous or ancient traditions. And as a corollary, the managing or working with the ongoing challenges around things like cultural appropriation, cancel culture, the fear of doing the right thing for retribution. I have a number of others, but do any of those immediately stand out to you as like a good place to go?
Ooh, yeah, there's like so many things. This idea of holistic wellness and really understanding how all things play a part, from, how you take care of yourself to how you connect and community with others, to even, like, for example, before we started this podcast, Skippy, I absolutely loved that you dropped us into a meditation. And it wasn't even like your standard meditation. It was like an actual visualization, practice that really brought me mentally into a beautiful heart space. And this idea of setting the space and, having some sort of like ritual and intentional opening to something like a big project. You're welcoming a new team for a new public service project of some sort. Like, what are these little ways that you can really bring people into that heart space, really set an intention? And it doesn't have to be overly big. It can just be like, hey, let's all take some deep breaths together and visualize the outcome that we want to see, some sort of ceremonial or ritual approach, which I think is sorely lacking and leads to a spiritual malnourishment for people who are actually serving a sacred mission, right? Like, public service, collective health and well-being is sacred work, and serving something that is much bigger than ours. And that's super akin to this path of service, or even entering into this deeply healing space. I mean, the idea is that individual healing and collective healing are absolutely intertwined. There are small ways where you can help people to really connect from their heart to the larger mission at work, and then build this sense of community around the mission and the vision, and work from a bit of a spiritual or perhaps heart-centered, if you tend that way, a little bit better approach.
I love that. I hear you talking about sort of the cultivation of space and community to orient to healing, my words. And though the environments are different, I can see parallels. So, for example, in a public space and traditional space, whether that's a city council meeting, a school board meeting, a PTA meeting, any place people are coming together to try to solve collective problems, you encounter people who come in with different perspectives and different interests, people who come in with fear, justified or otherwise, of the other. Someone else is trying to do X to me. People coming in with a perspective of victimhood. Things are happening to me. Fear of loss. It won't go my way. And then environmental fears. I'm on camera. Someone's going to quote me in the newspaper. I'm going to be, made fun of on social media. I'm going to be turned into a meme, right? I'm going to get canceled. So you have a lot of this fear circling in the room. And yet everyone is selected to be in the room because they want to do something to better their community. Whether the others see that or not, that's true. And so I think of a new group coming to ceremony, and maybe this is early in your years, doesn't have to be, take whatever example works, but where first off, the participants are coming in. They've also made an affirmative choice to be in a healing container. There's something that they want to improve. But if I was any guide, they're terrified. They're not sure what's going on. They're questioning everything, right? The ego goes into wanting to critique the environment so that it can create an excuse to not drink so that it doesn't fear the losing of the control. I imagine as you bring in people from different cultural traditions, there's natural fear about appropriation or fear about the disillusion of our traditions or the dishonoring of what we're doing or doing it the wrong way, fear of not getting it my way. So I imagine you have a lot of the same types of fears swirling. And I'm wondering very specifically, what are the things that you guys are doing, big or small, to set the physical environment, to set the emotional environment? And what behaviors are you taking as the leaders or facilitators to welcome people or open people up to a place where they can be more readily available to receive the healing that they've sought?
I think really building a sense of care and a genuine interest in every person's well-being and also their intentions and why they're there, and really like from the heart being like, wow, like welcome to our home, like welcome to this place that there is potent energy here, and it is because of the result of all of the amazing healing work that is done here that you all do, that feeds the heart of what it is here. And so really setting the tone of like, hey, we care about every single individual person's personhood and well-being and agency. So opening with love, right? Opening with love and connection. And whether that's like, going around in a circle and really introducing ourselves and sharing why we're here, and maybe a little bit of just like personal connection, right? Community building. And then we also communicate how we're going to keep people safe and what are the agreements that we have for being here in the space. So rather than just saying like, this is a safe space, it's like, okay, so during ceremony, if you need something, we have this person and this person here. We have a guard outside. Here's the walkie-talkies. If this happens, here's how we're going to deal with it. So just like helping people to feel like all of the sort of basics are handled and that we have a plan in case anything comes up that is different or challenging, and how we're going to support people. Really putting their sort of survival mind at ease and building that trust. And then agreements. So, hey, like you agree that if you come to ceremony, you will stay until the end of ceremony. We're not going to force you to drink if you don't want to drink, but if you come to ceremony, you will stay till the end of ceremony. Like that's an agreement, right? Or you will not walk around in the dark without your flashlight. It's important. We are in the jungle, right? You want to make sure you have a light, etc. So just like creating clear, or during group share, it's like we agree not to process or comment on anyone else's experience. You can comment on how their experience made you feel, and you can share your own experience, but we are here to like compassionately witness and not facilitate anybody else. So we agree to hold this space as sacred, and creating like agreements for communication and action. And so, yeah, I think helping people to orient as well to the way that this medicine works, the framework that is part of the Shipibo culture, and helping to understand where, and we don't ask anybody to believe in this, but we feel that it is important to do this cultural bridge work of, here is why and how this ceremony happens the way it does. Here's Maestro Francisco and Maestra Maricela, and they're going to share with you, their background and a bit about ayahuasca in their own words, and we'll translate. And so really connecting people to the culture and giving them that option, right, to enter into this framework in a more embodied way. And how that could maybe translate is like, what is the vision of what's happening in this particular meeting, or what is our goal, and like really enlisting everyone into that. And those are just some of the ways that we really try and set the space, and then also build bridges between worlds, and sharing with people as well what resources they have if they need them.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. And what I love about this process of what I'm now calling creating a healing space or healing environment. Or maybe it should just be a productive environment for collective action, because in this world, that's really what it is. But what I like about this is the last step is the start. It's really about cultivating the conditions for successful discussions. It's not about how to have the discussions, what they should be or what the outcome should be.
I just have one other thing I wanted to add, and that's sharing with people some tools that they can have themselves. So if something is coming up and they're feeling fear during ceremony, like touching the ground or, feeling the weight of their body. So in general, also resourcing people with tools that they can then use themselves in moments of stress or anxiety as well.
I think those would be really beneficial to people. But I want to just paint the picture for someone who's thinking about this and wondering how they can use it. And I'm going to use the example of a mayor in a municipal city council meeting because it's a familiar experience to me, but you can translate this to your board meeting, to your whatever gathering it is. It could be just a community meeting. But as a mayor, my opportunity, my recognition is not just to show up and get what I want. It's to cultivate the conditions for the best outcomes of the community to emerge. And so first I'm recognizing my role in that. Then I am finding a way to open the meeting by expressing genuine being the key word, gratitude and interest for everybody there. That doesn't mean lying. That doesn't mean bullshitting. It means searching deep inside of yourself to find a real reason. And if you don't have a reason for half the people in that room, then that should also be an aha to start doing some digging in other places. But it might simply be something as simple as, although I know we disagree, I am grateful that you have taken your very limited time and shown up. It's a demonstration that you care and I care that you care, whether we agree or not, right? Just finding some form of commonality to diffuse and set the room. And then allowing the space to feel safe. When we say safe, we mean psychologically safe, by putting a plan in place, like taking the ambiguity or the unknown, and the human mind loves to fill the unknown with stories of risk in from the beginning, which could be as simple as everyone in this room will be given a chance to speak if they want to. So just know you don't have to sit there perseverating over, will I get to say this? Are they going to hear me? You actually have the opportunity to sit and listen to everyone else, knowing that we will get to you, right? Something small, but what is that like? And then orienting people to the process. So for someone who's never been in the room, who doesn't know what a council meeting is like, how is this going to go? Let's remove that anxiety of the unknown for them and make sure everyone has it, and give them a chance to ask questions too, right? You really want everyone to be an educated participant in the room. And so take on that time and role to share, but also clarify so that everybody is on the same page on process. Once they're there, have the opportunity to introduce people, become human. Allow it to happen, folks. I know we have a long history of intentionally dehumanizing processes for fairness, and there was good reason for that. But guess what? We're reorienting to a holistic way. Until we start seeing each other as people, we're going to have a really hard time. So let people introduce themselves, let them share why they're there, what they care about, let them be seen, and then get agreements from those people. You will be respectful. You will not shout over somebody, right? Some of those things that you'd think would be pragmatic, but they are not. You will be heard, but at a reasonable volume. They're not going to be ad hominem attacks here, whatever that looks like for you. You can set that and get people to actually agree, to raise their hand. And if they fall short of those, lovingly remind them and call them back to that place for a productive session. And then lastly, setting shared goals. Hey, we're here today to work on X. Are we all in agreement? Is that what we want to do? Right? Just those simple steps create a condition for an infinitely better discussion. And I must say, the immediate trade-off of those is time. And we all have the story in public service. There's not enough time. There's too much to do. But I promise you, continuing to not act in this way, to not set the table, simply results in indecision ad infinitum, or poor decision that gets recycled time and time again, reversed time and time again. So, David Kahneman, go slow to go fast, I think deeply applies here. I just think this is so deeply transferable and great.
I love that it's kind of like investing in the soil to bear better fruit. And, really feeding the nutrients of the space, because what that is going to do is make for a vastly more efficient, productive, human, heart-centered approach and solutions-oriented focus for the rest of your time. So I love that. Go slow to go fast. And that was beautifully said.
Yeah, I love it. So now we're in the meeting and stuff is coming up that's uncomfortable. So now we're in the analogy, we're in ceremony and some things are coming up that are frightening. I've been there. And the only way through is through, but we are feeling scared, destabilized, angry, like name the emotion. And you want to get grounded back into a place where you can be there for the discussion or the learning in the analogy. And you started to talk about some techniques to do that. Can you share more?
In the context of ceremony, this is a very physiological process. It's really enlisting mind, body, spirit, which I think can be also said for, stress responses in general and when people get activated and triggered, right? It's a very physiological response. And oftentimes when we're in a state of fight or flight or freeze, even, it's our nervous system is overriding our executive functioning. And so what we really want to do in that situation is it's very individual. So it kind of depends. Like sometimes it's important for people to actually feel those emotions and move through that process because perhaps they haven't felt real anger, in a very long time and have been suppressing it. And that's actually what's causing them to be sick or, have a depression. And so sometimes it is actually important to really discharge that energy in some way. And, the medicine can work in different ways, but purging kind of is what we call this act of like energetic release from the nervous system. So that can be shaking, that can be vomiting, that can be using the bathroom, that can be changes in temperature, hot and cold, that can be yawning, it can be crying. There's so many, even mental chatter can sometimes be the form of purge. And so, a lot of this is really trusting that if there is something that needs to be released, then doing it in a way that is still like in the container of care and is as best as possible respectful of the people sitting next to you and whatnot. And like we have ways to support people if things are getting challenging for them. So that's one area. It's like sometimes things need to be released and expressed and felt deeply. And then sometimes if people are feeling really lost or just really anxious and is as if that in and of itself is sort of blocking them, then there are some tools that we offer. So one of them is grounding. So it's very straightforward. Put however much of yourself you'd like to on the floor. Sometimes it's better to like touch the wood and really kind of try and feel into the weight of gravity on your body and really get like this sense of your body once again, right? Because oftentimes if we're like really, really in our heads, we're really stressed out or anxious, we just need to remember that we have a body. And even just helping ourselves to orient in space can calm our nervous system down and take us out of this sort of like fight or flight mode.
So first for purging, in my experience in ceremony, a purge comes and it just comes. So there's a pharmacological forcing function to that purge that, at least for me, does not readily happen naturally in normal life, let's call it default world. And maybe that's because part of my programming is to suppress emotion. But for someone who is like me, how would you go about choosing a form of expression, or when? How do you know it's working or not if you're trying something? And that may be outside your scope because you guys are working with medicine, but do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily something that you're choosing. What we try and help people to find is a workable dose, a working dose, one where they have some sense of agency over their process. but they're also like really surrendering and opening up to the teachings of the medicine. So, you take too little, and again, it's not directly correlated with quantity. So I'll say little, but it doesn't always mean that. But you take too little, or you have like too little of an experience, and then maybe you're just very in your head. You can't really connect to the medicine, and in those cases, it can kind of help to calm your nervous system to really be able to open up to the medicine. Or opposite effect, you have too strong of an experience, or not too strong, but like you have an experience that is a little bit too far out of your control. Maybe that's necessary and like very, very case by case. But at the same time, if you basically black out for the ceremony, or you don't have really a recollection of what happened, then that's not going to be, it's not going to feel as if you've gotten much work done.
Yeah.
And maybe you did, but we want to kind of find a sweet spot where you're really conscious of the process, but you're also able to surrender and open yourself up to the experience. And so when you're in a very strong experience, oftentimes you're not really choosing what form of purging or release happens. But in a sort of working dose space, you're able to just actually tune in to what's needed in that moment from your body, from a place of openness and trust, rather than trying to kind of overly control the experience with your head. So I don't think that you necessarily choose it, but I think that if you are sensing that you're feeling blocked, or that you're, just very in your head about it, then I think there are some tools that can kind of bring you more into your body and open you up to the experience.
Got it. So the analogy might be if you're sitting at your office desk and you're feeling stressed and you're past deadline, and you notice the very familiar twinge in your left trapezius muscle, instead of immediately going into judgment and story around that, like, fuck, I don't have time for this right now. I need to be doing something. This hurts. And, wiggling would be like, stop, close the eyes, focus on it, feel into it, welcome it, and just let it be there and just see what happens.
Yeah, right. It's amazing what a little bit of acceptance can do for our own bodies and mental states.
Okay, great. Okay, so now for the grounding touch. Are there any specifics of this practice that are important? For instance, does it need to be bare skin contact to the floor or to wood? Can I wear my socks if I think my feet smell? Is there a duration of contact that is important? If you were to get like hyper nerdy about it, are there particular pieces to the practice that are important?
Actually, no. I think that the main thing to keep in mind is just really feeling your connection from a body felt sense to the ground. And that doesn't have to be bare skin, just feeling the weight of gravity. And the idea is to remember that you have a body and that you are connected to the earth. For me, on an energetic level, it helps me to picture the earth, the vast, vast land, as this large grounding circuit, or I don't know how you say that, but like as a grounding force. So when I touch the ground here, I can like literally picture my electromagnetic field and like electrical charge, usually because there's like anxiety or stress. I picture it going down and like spreading out across the huge earth as far as the eye can see. For me, that actually like literally helps to discharge the energy. So that's a visualization that I kind of like to use. But yeah, the idea is just to really remember that, you are a body.
You're talking about orientation, I believe, is what you were going into.
Yeah, so this is a way for our mammalian animal brains to actually physically feel safer. If you notice, like when a cat or a dog walks into the room, a new room, they will actually like physically turn their head and look around at the room, not just their eyes, but like their entire head. They'll look behind them, down. They'll literally like orient to the space by using their head and optic nerve to create this 3D image. And oftentimes we're so focused on the person that we're talking to or the screen that we're looking at, right? We just don't have like this sense of our surroundings. And so orienting to the space can like just literally be like slowly and naturally like looking all around you and moving your head to actually help our mammalian brain process that there is no immediate danger around us. And you would be amazed at how effective this is, just to sort of have that mental image of like, okay, I am physically safe. There's no saber-toothed tiger right behind me. So that can help, if you're in a stressful situation, just like take a moment and look around and like recognize, okay, I'm just here. I'm in a safe space.
So here's a follow-up question to that, which might sound silly, but I imagine it's actually an impediment to this. So if I'm walking into a room and I want to engage in this practice, I could imagine I walk in and I start looking around to do this thing, but immediately my head goes into like, shit, I look weird. People are staring at me. They're going to think I'm odd. I'm not going to fit in here. It's going to hurt my chances. Like, is anyone going to So I could just see this compounding all of the insecurities that I have. And so is there any trick or any way of doing this that could help ease some of those concerns if others share my lunacy?
Something that came to mind is like actually going around and just looking at everybody like as a greeting almost, right? Like, good morning, like, and you're kind of moving your head to everyone in the room. So you're sort of supporting your system and being oriented to everyone there, but also actually creating a little bit of a human connection of like saying good morning or good afternoon to everyone. Maybe you can't like turn your head all the way around and look at everything, but that could be one way to do it.
I love it. I'm chuckling because I'm like, oh, this is a Jewish hello. So I was brought up Jewish, and I wasn't familiar with this until recently. But someone said, "Are you doing a Jewish goodbye?" And the Irish goodbye is like you kind of disappear and you just hide out, right? And you just run out, or at least that's as I understand it. And I was like, "What is a Jewish goodbye?" They're like, "It's when you spend so much time saying goodbye to each person that so much time has passed when you got to the last person, you're forced to start over and you never leave." And I was like, oh, that's I do that. That is totally a thing. So now I'm imagining the Jewish hello.
Oh my God. I think that's an Italian goodbye too.
Yes. So I'm like, now we've got to like recognize each person in the meeting so long that we never get to the meeting because I've got to start over again. That is so good.
Yeah.
That
And
is
maybe,
so funny.
maybe not all of these things are applicable. This could also be good for if you're like, coming to a place first or one of the first people, and you're just kind of like letting yourself look around, just slowly and kind of assessing and before other people get there, something like that.
It's also a great tip is get there first if you want to go look around the room and not feel awkward.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you could go at a different time. You could go the day before when the meeting room is empty.
Absolutely.
In a lower stakes environment, you could practice the immersion and just get your nervous system used to the space. You could go sit down in the lectern to give public comment when there's nobody on the other side of the dais and take some breaths and then come back the next day. And it won't be easy, but because I've sat there for years and it doesn't get disappeared, but you could mitigate that. That's really awesome. So tools of grounding, physical grounding in touch, physical space orientation, and purging or accepting the expression of a sensation. Those are great. Are there any others that are important standouts?
One other somatic one that we found can be helpful for people is self-contact. And this can vary widely based on the person's level of comfort with themselves and their own body. But what we would suggest if people are, if there is some trauma associated, is to just really start at the extremities and slowly, potentially work your way into maybe giving yourself a hug or putting your hand on your heart or putting your hand on your belly. But again, starting on the extremities, if there are any trauma points in any of that area. Another really great one that I use a lot for stress and tension is just gently putting my hands behind my neck at the base of my skull and just kind of holding them there and just breathing and just feeling held by myself. And this is like a little bit of a self-care practice. And it's also this reminding of it's like helping your body to recognize itself in space. And when your brain can better map where your body is in space with more precision, because it's been touched or been, felt in the felt sense, then it actually has this systemic calming effect. Your brain doesn't have to work as hard to know where it is. And there's like a change in output from that change in input.
Yeah, beautiful. I imagine these things will be very helpful to many people. And though they seem small, it is the accumulation of small actions that make really big differences.
I guess the last thing I'll say in this regard is like we tell people, hey, if you're feeling lost, tune into the Icaros. Like they will guide you. That can be your sort of anchor. Sometimes the breath can be helpful as well, but sometimes if people are already sort of in a panicky state, tuning into the breath can actually be more activating. So depending on how you want to use that, if that feels supportive for you, use that. But like we'll really say like, hey, like the Icaros are your guides here. And so I think that could be like, what's the through line, tuning into the larger reason you're here, right? What's the mission? What's the sacred work that you're coming here to do? And can you realign yourself to that amidst the storm?
Beautiful. I think the cultural integration piece is something that is so top of mind for just about everyone for very different reasons in different places these days. There's just no way of getting around the reality of the world is shrinking. And I think it's just a reality of we're 10 years into everyone having a smartphone. So people are going to move to where they see the life that they want. And that is naturally going to raise tension, just as somebody knocking at your front door unexpectedly raises tension for the individual family. And so there's all these swirling questions about how do we integrate and honor other traditions? How do we protect our own traditions? I think of, coming from a Jewish tradition, right? Like the loss of the Yiddish language or the loss of thousands of languages over the course of the last hundreds of years. What do we do to preserve culture while also accepting others? And then we get caught in this whirlpool, or we can get caught in this whirlpool of, I want to embrace another culture, but now if I do, I'm going to get called out for cultural appropriation, or I might get canceled. And so I become so afraid of saying the wrong thing that I stop asking the question. I actually inhibit myself from learning. I end up creating or being complicit in unintentionally the outcome I claim not to want, which is, xenophobia or separation. But my separation was driven by my own fear of being judged for wanting to know. And that's a really long way to explain a bunch of different things that are going on in my head, and I know others. But it seems that you guys have done as good of a job as anyone I've seen in really integrating and honoring, in this case, the Shipibo tradition, a medicine tradition that comes out of the Amazon basin, not from where you grew up, supporting and working with those communities, and presumably having navigated some pushback along the way. I don't know that to be true, but I would be surprised to find that it hasn't happened. And so I'm wondering if you could just kind of start describing how that all happened. And I will probably rudely interject with some questions as you go, because I think this is a really vital place to learn from your experience as leaders and how to navigate these very challenging waters.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for this question, because it's a living question for me all the time, and we are constantly aware that we are doing cultural bridge work here. And in the bridging, it's people, but it's also paradigms, and it's also all of the colonialism and trauma and like deeply rooted histories of the cultures that are actually interacting. And the first main thing that I would recommend, and that I think has been the foundation for why we have at least mostly succeeded, as far as I can tell, is just really building actual relationships with the people that you're working with, and not necessarily like romanticizing or painting with the same brush like an entire culture, right? It's like it's about the individual people that are a part of this collaboration and honoring them as, you know, the humans that they are, and like what can I learn from you, you know, how can I listen better, what is it that you want to see in this work. Okay, we have to create some sort of standardized structure because, you know, we want to make sure that everybody gets personalized attention. What works best for you in that situation? And trying to kind of just understand, you know, what is it that, or like, for example, what projects are you working on that we can support with in reciprocity? Oh, you would like your family to come up and visit. Okay, like let's do that. And at the same time, holding same agreements as we would with everybody else, you know, and so it's this balance of personal relationship and then mutual agreement because we're working together and we're in a work environment. It's a hard balance to strike sometimes, right? Because we're coming in with kind of different worldviews and perspectives. But at the end of the day, it's working on this human to human level and working within a collaborative spirit, and then both agreeing to the structure of the fact that, like, hey, we're doing this work here. So just like everyone else on our working team, you know, we treat each other with respect as employees, as coworkers, as team members, really. So there's like this balance of we're family and we're also working together on a team and we're trying to do something. And the sort of step beyond that, how we actually act in reciprocity, is talking with the healers that we're working with and finding out, hey, like, what is it that, oh, you're wanting to start a Shipibo school for Shipibo children. Like, how can we, you know, help contribute to that? How can we share about that with our communities? Oh, you're writing a book. Can we help translate that? Okay, great. And then we'll sell it on the retreat, you know, to folks. Or, you know, just what are the ways we want to make sure that we're giving back to the Amazon, that we're fighting for the conservation of the land, right? That they are amazing stewards of. And that we are, yeah, like in reciprocity and like a larger scale than just the sort of transactional nature of the work. Obviously making sure that we're paying everyone well in a way that is supportive for them. And then in how we share about the work that we do, I think is also really important and is something that, you know, we're constantly learning and evolving and growing, but really trying to be very grounded and not necessarily creating a romanticization or fetishization or sensationalism about this work, about the Shipibo culture, you know, about any one healer. Also, not necessarily saying like, okay, because this one healer said this, then like the Shipibo think, right? Like, no one person is a spokesperson for an entire culture.
If you thought about this in the way of, like, you have a new hire, they are a communications expert, they are tied into the work, so they come with a base of knowledge is the point, and you are going to be sending them out from a place of trust into their first live Q&A on the internet. And you got to give them like a 1-page bulleted how-to manual of the things that you would ask them to guide their responses. What would those be?
I would say that we really want to take a very grounded approach to this work, understanding that this is a traditional healthcare system that we are entering into, and that we are wanting to meet people where they are and being able to share that this is not a panacea. We're not interested in romanticizing a culture, fetishizing a culture. I think it's important to have disclaimers, which is what we do at the beginning of our Q&As, which is like the person who is running the event has worked with Shipibo healers, and she's very, very clear to say, like, I have worked with multiple healers and the Shipibo work from an oral tradition. And so the answers and my understandings are directly from the healers that I have studied and that have taught me. This is not like to say that this is what the Shipibo think, right? So I think that's like really important, because I do feel like that is, maybe that's like the romanticization aspect, right? So we want to make sure that people understand that this is not like a miracle. This is not a panacea. This is not a silver bullet. You know, we've sort of heard these platitudes in the psychedelic movement for some time now. And, but it is really important to help people to manage expectations and, from this grounded place of like, hey, you're going to get out of this what you put in, and there are no guarantees, and this work is non-linear. And so it may look a lot different. Like you may come and you may actually not have any visuals. And the reason being that this could be really important physical, energetic work that preempts any sort of mental visual space. So just orienting people to the uniqueness of the experience and the understanding that this is a relational medicine and we're working with healers who carry a tradition but have their own unique medicine that they bring, right? Just like every other person on the team. Really wanting to be like integrative, educational, meet people where they are and manage expectations and just honor the individual journey and the medicine that everyone brings to the table.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good and so applicable. I mean, grounded, non-sensational, non-universalizable, non-fetish, non-romantic, managing expectations and putting the onus on the participant. Yeah, that's in so many ways the real truth that I think we as citizens desire because it respects us as true. Like we know bullshit when we hear it, and it really honors the listener and their humanity and their wisdom. And unfortunately, that's not always rewarded. Sometimes the shiniest, biggest snake oil promise is rewarded, but that's a short-term fix. It's not a long-term solution. So I think that's just such good advice that I hope people will pay attention to. Have there been times, whether it's private in a DM or public, where you guys, Soltara, has come under scrutiny for you name it, whether it's cultural appropriation or misusing language, something big or small, but is there an example you could point to that's real and you could explain how you responded to it as a guide for someone else who has accusations, whether they have merit or not, as to best practices of how to respond to such a thing?
Yeah, I'll share an example. So part of the facilitation and translation that happens when we're, translating for the healers is also a cultural translation. And this is part of that, like bridge walking, right? That's, I think is always, we're constantly asking ourselves, is this like sanitization of the culture, or are we translating dark energy and bad spirits into heavy energy in the system of the patient? Because we know that saying that somebody has a, dark energy attached to them is not going to be supportive at all for their process. This can be somewhat difficult because we're trying to balance the very real cosmology of the Shipibo and the Shipibo tradition and, their way of orienting to this work, because for them, connection to the spirit world, like it's not always light and love. There all things exist, right? And for them, they are very attuned to this idea of like good spirits and bad spirits and, dark entities and, things that we might consider brujeria as like the shadow side of the magic and energetic work that is done in their space, because this is a very rich cultural tradition. It doesn't just like apply specifically to the way that we have worked with it at Soltara in a healing context. Right. So as I said before, like they don't always just use this for healing, and everybody's human, right? Everybody's got their own shadows. So when we're sort of trying to culturally translate, it's like this balance of like how to be accurate to what they are saying, while also not inciting unnecessary fear in the person that is receiving that translation, because that's just not a framework that they're used to thinking of. Like, sometimes a healer will be like, oh yeah, he's just like, he's got bad energy. So we'll clear that out. Like no big deal, right? It's like you clear out the bad energy. That's what they're there for. That's what they do. But if someone hears like, I have bad energy, or like, I have like a dark spirit, like, then there's this whole rabbit hole that they could go down in their head that is just not supportive, because it's it's just a different cultural perspective. So yeah, so part of that cultural translation can be kind of difficult. In the beginning when we were really learning how to do this in a good way, that also is like, okay, but wait, are we like sanitizing their culture if we're not translating it directly? Like, how does this work? There are people that come that also speak Spanish that can, understand exactly what they're saying, and then realizing that we're not translating it directly and then get really concerned. And, so it's like kind of having to sort of manage that bridge work of being like, yes, we see and understand, but like at the same time, we're not going to create unnecessary fear in someone. We're not going to deny that this is like their reality. And, so how to create this supportive container when there are worldviews that are not super conducive to each other all the time, I think is part of this ongoing work of how do we be this bridge.
Do you have those conversations with the maestros, for instance, when you want to, let's call it, culturally adapt a translation to ask for their input or permission? Or how does that work? Are they part of that process?
Yeah, they are. And it's again this like interesting thing because it's like we don't want to ask them to say things that aren't true for them or to not be fully in their truth in what they're saying. At the same time, and as a result of this, like we have had several conversations about just like, hey, like, just so you know, this is like when people come into this space and they're not used to hearing like these types of terms or understanding things and the way that you understand them. So we've been trying to kind of translate this, but we don't want you to feel like it's kind of this like ongoing conversation of like how to connect on like the best way to share about this information in a way that is still true for the maestro and maestra, while also understanding that like the worldviews are very different. And so, for example, like, I think that discussion of like brujeria, which if research shamanic Amazonian traditions, like this is a very common thing that occurs. And, there are many people within the culture that recognize this as a real thing. And it doesn't really pertain to the work that we're doing here. And so, sometime basically we've all agreed, like, we're not bringing any talk of brujeria as a concept into this space because it's not necessary. It's not the work that we do. And, it doesn't make for a conducive healing process for the guests that come in. And that's like an alive question for me, like whether that's like sanitizing a culture or trying to be a good bridge. I'm not really sure, So it's just about having this like ongoing conversation with everybody involved, with the facilitators and with the maestros of how to best do this.
Yeah, the way I sort of hear it is like you're a doctor and somebody comes in with like a runny nose and a cough, and there's any number of things that they could have, but it wouldn't be a requirement of your Hippocratic oath to tell them that those two things are symptoms of stage 4 liver cancer that's uncurable. Like that might be true, but there's like 1,000 things before that that would be easier and more easily explained, and sharing that single truth with them is likely to do more damage than benefit. And there might be a future universe where you would get to that, but it would be silly to open with that, is sort of how I'm hearing it.
Yeah, because for so many people, it's like their first entrance into this culture and framework and cosmology, and so it's like we need to start at chapter 1 before we jump to chapter 20.
Yeah.
And this is an entire thousands of years old culture and people. There's so many nuances, so many evolutions and complexities, and so as best we can, it's like how do we create a space that is supportive and conducive to healing within the traditional framework of Shipibo. But it's we don't call ourselves authentic. We don't even say the words like we're a traditional healing center because one, what does that even mean? Because tradition and like authenticity
Hmm.
is like kind of this tradition is constantly changing and growing, and like authentic is a very
It's
marketing
time-stamped.
buzzword term. Yeah. So like we really don't use that at all. And also because we recognize that like normally in like if you do go into the jungle to a healer's house, you're not going to do yoga before your ceremony. You're not going to have a facilitator there who speaks English and is trauma informed, right? Like so it is this bridge work, this integrative work.
Yeah, so good. Well, Melissa, there is literally a whole page of things that I would love to get to, but you've been so generous with your time. I'd love to hear how you handle crisis comes or people who leave who don't have a great experience. I'd love to get into sort of the co-creation of healing and the integration of ancient and modern. We never got to Dieta, which was top of my list. So there is so much to come back to. Some of the new studies on healing generationally, it goes on and on. So there will have to be a round two. But to close up today, I always finish these episodes with the same question for everybody, which is that our audience are not passive observers. They're not armchair quarterbacks. They're not couch potatoes. I saw that Super Bowl ad recently. They are the humans in the arena. They are the ones making or enacting or carrying out change. And so if you could leave that very active audience with just one last thing, could be a thought, a practice, an invitation, a quote, anything at all that would best resource them to be a vector for healing our politics, what would you leave them with?
I would leave them with a deeply, deeply heartfelt thank you, a sharing of my own gratitude that they are part of this collective vision and mission for a system of society that is regenerative, that helps people thrive, that allows for abundance and positive outcomes and change. And that is no small thing to work towards. That is sacred work. And I am so, so grateful to be on mission with you out there in working towards the better world that we absolutely know is possible. So I salute you. I cheer you on. I am in awe of you. And I am so grateful to be on this team with you. Thank you. And thank you, Skippy. I mean that every word for you as well.
Oh, ditto. And this mission, this cause, this effort would not be without you and what you've built. So simpatico.
Thank you, Skippy. Go team, hey?
Go team. If people want to reach you, find you, follow you, Soltara, the book, anything else, anything you want to leave people with of where they can go, log in, etc.?
Sure. So I'd welcome anyone on this journey of just holistic healing. Doesn't have to be just plant medicines or psychedelics, but our online community platform, The Maloca, TheMaloca.com, is our platform, and it's a completely private platform, no data mining, and really just built for community. So would love to welcome you in there. And of course, soltara.co is our website, and you can find me on Instagram. I don't really post very much, but Melissa Stangl is me on Instagram, and Soltara Healing Center is Soltara.
Would you spell your name for someone listening for the Instagram?
Sure. It's MELISSALYNNESTANGL.
Beautiful. And on that, I wish you a beautiful day and lots of healing and sunshine for you.
Thank you, Skippy. Thank you so much for everything you've done for this movement. I am so eternally grateful to be here with you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to put what you've heard here today into practice, sign up for our newsletter, The Leader's Handbook, where each month you'll receive just one email with a curated selection of the most useful tools and practices discussed on this podcast today and over the course of the last month, delivered in simple how-to worksheets, videos, and audio guides, so you and your teams can try and test these out in your own life
and see what best serves you. And lastly, if you want to be a vector for healing our politics, if you want to do your part, take out your phone right now and share this podcast with 5 colleagues you care about. Send a simple text, drop a line, and leave the ball in their court. Because the truth is, the more those around you do their work, the better it will show up in your life, in your community, and in your world. Have a beautiful day.
As leaders, we all face contentious situations. As an Aspen City Councilman, I navigated some of the most contentious STR and land use conversations in a generation. And while most were engaged in a food fight, profit versus community, SkyRun Vacation Rentals, a company built on community-first values for 20 years that I know personally, helped me find a solution that created positive outcomes for everyone. If you want responsible vacation rentals in your community to strengthen the local economy, SkyRun is the vacation rental company for you. To experience their commitment to care and community up close, use code HOP15, that's Healing Our Politics 15, for 15% off a stay at one of their locations, whether for yourself or someone in your community. There's a link in the show notes below. Feel free to share it.
The Healing Our Politics podcast is brought to you by the Elected Leaders Collective, the first leading and most highly recognized name in mental health, well-being, and performance coaching for elected leaders and public servants, designed specifically for you. Now, don't be fooled by the name. The Elected Leaders Collective is not just for elected leaders. It is for all public servants, staffers, volunteers, government, nonprofit, whole organizations. This is for you. If you are filled with passion for improving your community and world, but are tired, as I am, of the anger, stress, and vitriol, if you find yourself banging your head against that same wall, struggling with the incoming criticism and threats, arguing with colleagues who are supposed to be on your team, and questioning if it's even worth it anymore, then the Elected Leaders Collective programming is specifically for you. With the Elected Leaders Collective, you will learn to become a hashtag political healer, building the authentic, unshakable confidence and courage to stay true to yourself through the anger and pressure, while cultivating the open, empathetic mind to meet others with the curiosity, compassion, and kindness necessary to respond to threats, improve challenging relationships, de-escalate conflict, and bring people in your community together to solve real problems and get shit done. You'll reduce stress, anxiety, and overwhelm, and become a more effective leader while having time for your family, yourself, your health, and your wealth, sleeping well at night, and showing others they can too. Now that's leadership. Healing Our Politics listeners receive 10% off all Elected Leaders Collective services using the code hashtag political healer. Use it today and become one of the brave political leaders healing our politics. Use code hashtag political healer by going to www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today. That's www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today.